Hey guys, tonight we're descending into the shadowed corridors of ancient Egypt, where power wasn't just inherited, it was performed, ritualized, and wrapped in layers of divine theatre so bizarre that modern minds struggle to separate faith from manipulation. You're standing in the dim forecourt of a palace at Thebes, watching as priests approach the newly crowned pharaoh with a golden box, and inside that box, coiled and agitated, is a living cobra. The air smells of myrrh and sweat. Drums pulse at the rhythm of a resting heartbeat. What you're about to witness isn't just a coronation accessory being fitted, it's a dance with venom, a contract with chaos itself, and the first of many rituals that will define this ruler's relationship with the divine and the deadly. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, like why ancient Egyptian art obsessively depicts that rearing serpent on every royal forehead, or why pharaohs seem to age backward in their statues even as historical records showed them growing frail. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below. But make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Tell me where you are in the world right now, what time it is as you listen, or maybe just say hello. I love knowing this journey is shared across time zones and continents. Now let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You watch as the high priest of Wadjet approaches, his hands trembling slightly despite decades of practice. The cobra, a specimen of Naja Hadje, the Egyptian cobra, has been carefully selected for its size, its markings, and most importantly its temperament. Not docile, never docile, because a tame serpent would invalidate the entire ritual. The danger has to be real. The priests have spent 3 days purifying this creature in natron baths and feeding it specifically prepared offerings. They've whispered incantations to it, treated it not as an animal, but as the living embodiment of Wadjet, the cobra goddess who once protected Ra himself during his nightly journey through the underworld. The pharaoh, let's say it's Amenhotep III, young and uncertain despite his divine bloodline, kneels on a limestone platform. He's been fasting for 2 days. His skin has been scrubbed with sand until it's raw, then oiled with a mixture containing crushed lapis lazuli, because blue is the colour of the heavens, and he must smell like the sky itself. Around you, the gathered nobles maintain absolute silence. One cough, one shuffle of sandals could be interpreted as a bad omen, and bad omens at a uraeus ceremony have historically resulted in the offending party being exiled to the turquoise mines of Sinai, where life expectancy hovers around 18 months. The priest opens the golden box with a speed that seems almost casual, and in one fluid motion, practiced 10,000 times on clay replicas, he grasps the cobra behind its head. The serpent writhes, its body coiling around his forearm, and you can see venom already glistening on its fangs. This is the moment where faith meets physics. The priest must now secure the uraeus, the rearing cobra crown ornament, to the pharaoh's forehead while keeping the living snake close enough that its movements animate the golden replica. Some scholars believe the cobra was actually attached directly to the crown for these ceremonies, held in place by a sophisticated mechanism that allowed it to move while preventing it from striking. Others argue that's insane, that the living cobra was merely held nearby while the golden uraeus was affixed. You lean closer, trying to see the truth through the incense smoke. The priest's lips move in the ancient formula: she who rears up, she who burns, she who drives away the enemies of Ra. The pharaoh doesn't flinch as the golden cobra is pressed against his forehead, and secured with linen bandages that have been soaked in pine resin. The adhesive will hold for hours, and during that time the pharaoh will process through the city, the uraeus catching sunlight, seeming to move and breathe. The people will see their king marked by the goddess herself, and they'll understand that to oppose him is to face the cobra's venom. But here's where it gets deliciously weird. Several papyri from the New Kingdom reference uraeus venom ceremonies, where drops of cobra venom were actually applied to the pharaoh's forehead during coronation. Diluted, presumably, but present. The idea was that by surviving contact with the goddess's poison, the pharaoh proved his divine nature. Mortals would die, gods would be transformed. You watch as the priest produces a small vial, alabaster, stoppered with wax, and you realize this might be one of those ceremonies. The pharaoh closes his eyes. A single drop touches his skin where the uraeus rests. His jaw tightens. Cobra venom, even diluted, causes intense burning pain, localized necrosis, and in sufficient doses, paralysis and death. For 5 minutes, nothing happens. Then 10. The pharaoh's breathing remains steady. He opens his eyes, and they've dilated to the point where the iris is barely visible, a side effect of the venom's neurotoxins, but to the assembled witnesses, it looks like his eyes have filled with divine light. He stands, and a collective exhalation ripples through the crowd. He has survived the goddess's kiss. He is no longer merely human. Historians still argue whether these venom ceremonies were standard practice, or reserved for particularly contested successions, where a new pharaoh needed to prove legitimacy through dramatic demonstration. What's not debated is the psychological impact. Every time the pharaoh appeared in public with the uraeus blazing on his forehead, everyone who saw him remembered this moment, remembered that he'd been marked by venom and divinity in equal measure. The living cobra is returned to its golden box now, to be kept in the Temple of Wadjet until the next coronation or crisis. But the golden uraeus remains, and you notice something odd. Tiny holes have been drilled along its length. Later, you'll learn these holes allowed the insertion of wires connected to a mechanism hidden in the pharaoh's crown. A simple system of pulleys that let priests standing nearby make the cobra appear to move during ceremonies. Divine magic, or ancient special effects. The Egyptians would have argued there's no difference. Word count. 187. Wait, I need to continue and reach the proper word count. Let me extend this section properly. You follow the procession as it moves from the forecourt into the palace proper. The pharaoh walks differently now, his gait more deliberate, his spine impossibly straight. The uraeus adds weight to his head certainly, but it's more than physical. He's moving as someone who has just survived a test that would have killed anyone with impure intentions. Ahead, the throne room awaits, and you can already hear the ritual musicians warming up their sistrums, the metal rattles that sound like rain on papyrus, like the shimmer of heat on desert stones. What most people don't realize is that the uraeus wasn't just worn during major ceremonies. Once attached, it became part of the pharaoh's daily uniform, and ancient bureaucratic texts are filled with mundane references to uraeus maintenance specialists. Artisans whose sole job was to polish the cobra, repair its mechanisms and occasionally replace it when the gold wore thin. One Middle Kingdom papyrus even records a complaint from a maintenance specialist who wasn't paid on time, and his protest letter dryly notes that even the goddess who protects the two lands requires mortal hands to keep her gleaming. The ceremony continues for hours, but the most intense moments are behind you. The pharaoh will now receive the crook and flail, the false beard, the various crowns representing Upper and Lower Egypt. But none of those symbols will carry the visceral impact of the uraeus. because everyone in the room, from the highest noble to the lowest servant, has seen the cobra in its box. They know it's real. They know its venom can kill. And they know their pharaoh touched it and survived, which means he carries within him something that transcends mere mortality, or at least he's got a better relationship with the palace physicians than anyone else in Egypt. That's a joke, but only barely. The medical knowledge required to calculate non-lethal venom doses was extraordinary, and several scholars have suggested that the cobra ceremonies were, among other things, a demonstration of Egypt's scientific capabilities disguised as religious theatre. You're standing at the edge of a massive courtyard in Memphis, and the sun is brutal, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer and dance above the limestone pavement. Before you, a course has been laid out with boundary stones, each one carved with the names of Egypt's nomes, the administrative districts that stretch from the delta to the first cataract. The pharaoh who's about to run this course is 67 years old, his joints swollen with arthritis, his breath coming in laboured gasps even before the race begins. This is the Hebsed festival, and what you're about to witness is either the most inspiring display of royal determination or the most elaborate weekend at Bernie's situation the ancient world ever produced. The Hebsed was supposed to occur after 30 years of rule, then repeat every 3 years thereafter, though pharaohs with shaky legitimacy sometimes scheduled them earlier, and robust rulers sometimes skipped them entirely because, frankly, running laps in your 60s while wearing full ceremonial regalia sounds like an elaborate form of state-sponsored suicide. But theory and practice diverged wildly here. The ritual's purpose was to prove the pharaoh still possessed the physical vigour to rule, to demonstrate that his ka, his vital life force, remained strong enough to maintain Ma'at, the cosmic order that kept Egypt prosperous and the Nile flooding on schedule. You watch as priests help the pharaoh into his costume. He wears the white crown of Upper Egypt, a kilt so heavily pleated it looks like corrugated architecture, and a false beard that adds another 2 pounds to equipment he's already struggling to manage. In his right hand he clutches a document, possibly a land deed, possibly a symbolic representation of his authority over Egypt's territory. In his left hand, nothing, because he'll need that for balance. The priests have rubbed his legs with oil infused with willow bark extract, which contains salicylic acid, a natural anti-inflammatory. Ancient performance enhancement, right there in plain sight. The crowd assembled for this spectacle numbers in the thousands. They've travelled from every corner of Egypt, because witnessing a Hebsed festival is considered both a civic duty and a guarantee of good fortune. Street vendors are selling fried fish and beer at prices that would make modern stadium concession stands blush. Children perch on their father's shoulders, and everyone, absolutely everyone, is wondering the same thing. Will he make it, or will we be shopping for a new pharaoh by sunset? The course itself is approximately 300 feet around, though measurements vary depending on which archaeological site you're examining. Djoser's Hebsed court at Saqqara suggests a more compact route, while later festivals seem to have expanded the distance, possibly because longer courses made for better spectacle, possibly because the priests were sadists. The boundary stones aren't just decorative, each represents a portion of Egypt's territory, and by running past all of them, the pharaoh symbolically renews his dominion over every inch of the kingdom. Miss a stone, and you've theoretically surrendered that region to chaos. No pressure. A trumpet sounds, not the bright, brassy fanfare you might expect, but a low, mournful note that seems to rise from the earth itself. The pharaoh begins to move. Calling it running would be generous. He's doing something between a shuffle and a ceremonial jog, his knees barely lifting, his face set in a grimace that the official artist will later transform into a serene smile on temple walls. You can hear his breathing from 20 feet away, each inhale a ragged gasp. One of the younger princes in the crowd mutters something to his companion, and a priest immediately appears at his elbow, whispering urgently. Disrespecting the Hebsed is disrespecting Maat itself, and Maat has a long memory. Here's the part that historians still argue about. How much of this was real, and how much was theatre? Some evidence suggests that particularly frail pharaohs were carried around the course on palanquins, completing the ritual symbolically rather than literally. Other sources indicate that stand-ins, priests or princes of similar build, might have run the course while the pharaoh participated from a shaded pavilion. His presence diffused across the ceremony like incense through air. And then there are the truly bizarre theories, the ones that respectable Egyptologists mention only after several drinks, suggesting that some Hebsed festivals involved ritual substances, possibly derived from blue lotus flowers or Syrian rue, that placed the pharaoh in an altered state where he believed he was running even while standing still, and the assembled witnesses similarly affected confirmed his success. But this pharaoh, the one you're watching now, appears to be genuinely suffering his way around the course. He's completed one lap. The priests are counting. They've got notched sticks they're marking with each circuit, because apparently even divine kingship requires accountants. He starts the second lap, and you notice his gait has changed. He's moving more smoothly now, either because his muscles have warmed up or because the willow bark extract has kicked in, or possibly because he's entered that dissociative state that marathon runners describe, where pain becomes abstract and the body moves independently of conscious thought. By the fourth lap, something remarkable happens. The crowd's rhythmic chanting, a repetitive Ankh, Vedja, Seneb, life, prosperity, health, seems to physically lift him. His pace increases slightly. The priests look genuinely surprised, glancing at each other with expressions that seem to say, "We thought we'd be carrying him by now." One scholarly theory proposes that the Hebsed course was deliberately designed to be barely achievable, calculated to push an aging pharaoh to his absolute limit without killing him, because the spectacle of struggle followed by triumph was more politically valuable than easy success. A pharaoh who breezes through the Hebsed looks fit. A pharaoh who suffers but perseveres looks divinely sustained. The boundary stones blur past. You lose count of the laps. Was that 7 or 8? The official count is supposed to be 4 circuits, but you've heard rumours that the number varies, that some pharaohs negotiate with a priest beforehand, that deals are struck in temple back rooms where the price of reducing the course might be a generous donation to Tar's cult, or a favourable marriage alliance with some provincial governor's daughter. Religion and politics mix so thoroughly you can't separate them with a sieve. Finally the trumpet sounds again. The pharaoh completes his final lap and collapses, gracefully, if collapse can be graceful, onto a throne that priests rush forward to position beneath him. His chest heaves. Sweat has turned his ceremonial kilt transparent. The false beard has shifted, giving him a lopsided appearance that will never make it into official artwork, but he's done it. He's proven his vigour, renewed his contract with the gods, secured his throne for another cycle. The crowd erupts in genuine celebration, and you realise that despite all the political calculation, despite the possible performance-enhancing drugs and the negotiated lap counts, there's something authentically moving about an old man pushing his failing body to satisfy an obligation older than memory. The aftermath of the Hebsed involves more ceremonies. The pharaoh must now sit on 2 thrones, one for Upper Egypt and one for Lower, and receive the homage of every gnome's representatives. He must shoot arrows toward the 4 cardinal directions, symbolically defending Egypt from all threats. He must perform a ritual slaughter of enemies, which by the New Kingdom had become a symbolic gesture involving clay figurines rather than actual captives, though earlier periods remain disturbingly ambiguous on that point. But the run is the heart of it, the moment where divine kingship confronts human limitation and, through sheer theatrical will, transcends it. You watch as the pharaoh is carried away on a litter, and you notice that despite his exhaustion, he's smiling. Not the formal, hieratic smile of statuary, but something genuine, something that suggests that even for a living god, there's satisfaction in meeting a challenge and not collapsing until the acceptable moment. You're in the royal palace at Thebes, watching something that makes your modern sensibilities recoil, even as your historian's brain frantically takes notes. The pharaoh Amenhotep II is receiving his primary wife, and she's also his full sister. Same mother, same father, same gene pool getting shallower by the generation. This isn't a scandal being whispered about in corners. It's being celebrated with monumental inscriptions, temple reliefs, and propaganda that would make modern PR firms weep with envy. The marriage contract is being read aloud right now, and the scribe keeps using phrases like divine sister wife and she who shares the sacred blood, with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believes this arrangement makes perfect sense. Royal incest in ancient Egypt wasn't a dirty secret, it was a flex, a power move wrapped in religious justification and calculated political advantage. The official explanation went like this. The gods married their siblings, so pharaohs, being living gods, naturally followed divine precedent. Osiris married Isis, his sister. Set married Nephthys, his sister. The entire Egyptian pantheon was basically one big family reunion, where everyone brought a date who looked suspiciously familiar. By marrying their sisters, pharaohs weren't just mimicking the gods. They were proving their divine nature through their willingness to follow celestial marital patterns that would get mortal Egyptians side-eyed at minimum. But peel back the religious wallpaper, and you find political calculation so ruthless it's almost admirable. Royal women carried legitimacy in their blood, particularly daughters of previous pharaohs. A prince might have royal blood, but marrying the previous king's daughter, his own sister, doubled down on that legitimacy, creating a claim to the throne so ironclad that rival claimants might as well pack up and become priests. You watch as the sister wife receives the titles God's Wife, Great Royal Wife, Lady of the Two Lands. Each title comes with estates, revenues, and a power base that would make her dangerous if she weren't theoretically aligned with her husband through both marriage and shared genetics. The wedding ceremony itself is surprisingly brief. No elaborate vows, no exchange of rings, just a contract outlining property rights and succession arrangements. The real spectacle comes afterward, when the couple processes through Thebes in twin palanquins, identical in every detail, emphasizing their divine parity. The crowd doesn't look scandalized, they look reassured. Because in a worldview where cosmic order depends on pharaonic stability, a marriage that concentrates rather than dilutes royal blood makes perfect sense. The Nile floods on schedule when Ma'at is maintained, and Ma'at is maintained when the bloodline stays pure, or so the temple propaganda insists. Now here's where it gets medically complicated. Genetic evidence from royal mummies suggests that while sibling marriages were common in propaganda, the biological reality might have been more complex. Some supposed full sibling marriages may have actually been half-sibling unions. Same father, different mothers, which reduces genetic risk considerably. Others might have been entirely fictional, brother-sister language applied to cousins or even unrelated individuals to create the appearance of divine-style marriage. Historians still argue whether figures like Tutankhamun, whose mummy shows evidence of genetic disorders, represent the inevitable consequence of generations of inbreeding, or simply unlucky genetic lottery results that could happen in any family. You follow the newly married couple to the window of appearances, where they'll present themselves to the people. The sister wife is maybe 16, poised beyond her years, wearing a vulture crown that symbolizes her role as mother of the next generation. The pharaoh is 19, and you can see calculation in his eyes as he looks at her. Not affection, not desire, but the cool assessment of a political asset acquired. Some sibling marriages were undoubtedly warm partnerships. Akhenaten and Nefertiti, possibly cousins rather than siblings depending on which genealogy you trust, seem to have genuinely enjoyed each other's company. But this union feels transactional, a merger between two branches of the same corporate entity. The sister wife's father was the previous pharaoh, and by marrying his daughter, Amenhotep Shun isn't just honouring tradition, he's neutralising a potential rival power base. Any children from her previous marriage prospects are now absorbed into his lineage. Any estates she inherited now flow to his treasury. Any priests or nobles who supported her family now owe loyalty to the unified household. It's elegant, really, if you can ignore the genetic implications and the complete absence of choice for the young woman involved. But, and this is where Egyptian royal marriage gets truly Byzantine, the great royal wife wasn't the only wife. You glance around the palace and quickly count at least 5 other women who bear the title King's Wife, though without the great modifier. These secondary wives come from all over the known world. A Mitanni princess, a daughter of the Babylonian king, several Egyptian noblewomen from powerful families. Each marriage represents a diplomatic alliance, a trade agreement sealed in matrimonial paperwork. The sister wife might carry the most prestigious title, but she's operating in a political ecosystem where she needs to maintain alliances with co-wives who might have better foreign connections or more charismatic personalities. You watch as one of the secondary wives, the Mitanni princess, approaches to offer congratulations, and the body language is fascinating. The sister wife receives her with perfect courtesy, but there's a territorial stiffness to her posture, a subtle claim-staking that doesn't require words. The Mitanni princess might have brought a dowry that included trained horses and chariot technology, but she'll never wear the vulture crown, never produce an heir with the concentrated royal bloodline that legitimizes divine kingship. That's the sister wife's exclusive domain, and everyone in the room understands the hierarchy. Here's a detail that often gets overlooked. Royal women in these incestuous marriages wielded enormous power, precisely because they represented such concentrated legitimacy. Several female pharaohs, Hatshepsut most famously, leveraged their status as royal daughters and sister wives to claim the throne outright when circumstances allowed. The system that trapped women in sibling marriages also, paradoxically, armed them with legitimacy that male pharaohs from less pure bloodlines could never fully claim. Hatshepsut's propaganda relentlessly emphasized her divine birth and royal blood, using the very logic that justified sibling marriage to justify her rule. The celebration continues through the evening, with ritual dances and offerings to the gods who supposedly bless this union. You notice that the couple barely interacts. They're performing roles, not building a relationship. Later, papyri will record that this particular pharaoh fathered children with at least 7 different women, but only the children of his sister-wife will be considered fully legitimate heirs. The others will be royal, certainly useful for diplomatic marriages and administrative positions, but they'll always carry that subtle taint of diluted blood, of being slightly less divine than their half-siblings born from the proper union. As the night deepens, you overhear priests discussing another aspect of royal incest that rarely makes it into family-friendly museum exhibits: the theological implications of divine reproduction. If the pharaoh is the earthly embodiment of Horus, and his sister-wife is an embodiment of Hathor or Isis, then their union isn't just political or genetic, it's cosmological. They're reenacting creation myths, participating in the cycles that keep the universe functioning. When they produce an heir, they're not just continuing a dynasty, they're ensuring that the divine pattern continues unbroken. It's manipulation, certainly, but manipulation so thoroughly integrated into religious worldview that separating cynicism from faith becomes impossible. You're standing in a limestone chamber that smells of natron, resin, and something underneath those preservatives. The faint, sweet, sick odour of death that no amount of perfume quite masks. Before you on a wooden table lies a mummy, wrapped in enough linen to outfit a small textile factory, and surrounding this rigid form are priests holding the strangest collection of implements you've ever seen. An iron blade that gleams with an otherworldly sheen, the severed foreleg of a calf still dripping blood, a stone adze, 2 ostrich feathers, and what appears to be a wooden finger. This is the opening of the mouth ceremony, and what you're about to witness exists somewhere between surgery, seance, and the world's most elaborate puppet show. The head priest, his title is Sem Priest, and he's wearing a leopard skin that marks him as someone who operates on the boundary between living and dead, approaches the mummy with the iron blade. But this isn't ordinary iron. In pre-dynastic Egypt, before humans figured out smelting, iron came exclusively from meteorites, chunks of metal that literally fell from the sky. This blade, if the temple records are accurate, was forged from a meteorite that landed near Giza during the reign of Khufu, and it's been passed down through generations of priests specifically for this ceremony. The logic is crystalline. A blade from the heavens can cut through the barrier between life and death, can pierce the veil that separates the animated from the eternal. The Sem priest touches the blade to the mummy's mouth, or rather, where the mouth would be under 17 layers of linen wrapping. He recites, "Your mouth was closed, but I have set in order for you your mouth and your teeth." It sounds poetic until you realize what's actually being described. Reanimation. The ancient Egyptians believed that death sealed the mouth, and with it all the senses, the ability to eat, speak, breathe, see, hear. A sealed corpse was functionally useless in the afterlife, unable to speak the spells that would navigate the underworld, unable to eat the offerings left by the living, unable to defend itself against the demons that populated the Egyptian conception of the beyond. Now the assistant priest stepped forward with the calf's leg. This is where the ceremony veers from symbolic into viscerally strange. The Sem priest takes the bleeding limb and touches it to the mummy's mouth, smearing blood across the linen. The calf was slaughtered moments ago, specifically for this ritual, and its leg still contains what the Egyptians called Heka, the vital life force that animates flesh. By transferring blood from a living creature to a dead one, the priests believe they're jump-starting the Kai, feeding it enough energy to reconnect with the mummy's body. It's ancient magical thinking, but it's also proto-biological reasoning. Blood equals life, therefore blood might restore life, or at least restore enough life-adjacent properties to make the afterlife navigable. You watch, slightly nauseated, as the blood seeps into the linen. The Sem priest is chanting continuously now, and the rhythm is hypnotic, almost trance-inducing. Other priests join with instruments, finger cymbals, a drum that sounds like a heartbeat, a rattle that hisses like breath. They're creating a sensory environment that mimics life, sound, movement, rhythm, and directing it all at this silent, wrapped figure that will never breathe again. Except, from their perspective, it will. Just not in this realm, not in this dimension, but in the field of reeds, in the hall of judgment, in all those carefully mapped territories of the beyond that Egyptian religion spent millennia cataloguing. The adze comes next. It's a woodworking tool typically used to shape timber, but here it serves a different purpose. The Sem priest raises it high, then brings it down in a controlled strike that stops just short of actually touching the mummy. 4 times he does this, once each for the directions, once each for the elements, and with each symbolic strike he declares another sense restored. I open your eyes that you may see. I open your ears that you may hear. I open your nose that you may breathe the sweet breath of the north wind. Historians still argue about what was actually happening in these ceremonies beyond the obvious ritual theatre. Some suggest that the opening of the mouth originally involved literal manipulation of the corpse's face, prying open the jaws, perhaps inserting objects into the mouth cavity, before mummification techniques improved and the ceremony became purely symbolic. Archaeological evidence from early dynastic burials shows skulls with jaw trauma consistent with forced opening, though whether this was ceremonial or simply damage from rough handling remains debatable. By the New Kingdom, when mummification had become an art form and corpses were wrapped too elaborately to permit physical interference, the ceremony had evolved into pure ritual, all gesture and incantation without actual contact. But even as symbol, it carried weight. You can see it in how the assembled family members, the mummy's children and grandchildren, dressed in white mourning linen, lean forward, watching with desperate intensity. They genuinely believe that without this ceremony, their father or grandfather will be helpless in the afterlife, stumbling blind and mute through territories filled with monsters, unable to speak the passwords that grant passage past guardian demons, unable to declare his innocence before Osiris. The opening of the mouth isn't just religious obligation, it's the final act of love, ensuring that death doesn't mean helplessness. The Sem priest picks up the 2 ostrich feathers now. These represent Ma'at, the goddess of truth and cosmic order, and also the feathers against which the deceased's heart will be weighed in judgment. He brushes them across the mummy's face with movements so gentle they might be caresses. I purify you with the breath of Ma'at, he intones. I make your face live with the breath of life. The feathers, light as thought, are meant to represent air itself, the element that sustains all life, being returned to a body that no longer breathes. It's touching, really, this insistence that the essential components of life, breath, blood, sensation, can be restored through careful ritual, through the right words said in the right order with the right implements. The wooden finger is lost, and honestly nobody's entirely sure what it represents. Some papyri call it the finger of Set, connecting it to the god of chaos and storms, suggesting it might grant the deceased the strength to overcome obstacles. Others identify it as the finger of the craftsman god, Ptah, implying it restores the ability to make and create in the afterlife. The Sem priest touches it to the mummy's hands, one after the other, and declares, "Your hands are given to you, that you may work them in the field of reeds." Because apparently even the afterlife involves manual labour, the Egyptians envisioned eternity as an idealised version of Egypt, complete with farming, which meant you'd need functioning hands. The ceremony concludes with offerings: bread, beer, meat, all placed before the mummy as if it might actually consume them. And here's the truly weird part. The priests genuinely believed the car did consume them, not physically, but essentially. The food would remain physically intact, but its nutritional essence, its ka, would be absorbed by the deceased's ka. You'd come back later to find the bread still sitting there, unchanged, and this would be interpreted as confirmation that the spiritual eating had occurred successfully. It's unfalsifiable religious logic, but it's also economically convenient. The physical food could be redistributed to temple workers after the ceremony, meaning nothing went to waste while everyone maintained the comforting fiction that the dead were well fed. As you file out of the chamber with the other witnesses, you glance back at the mummy. It hasn't moved, obviously. The linen wrappings remain still. No breath animates the chest, no pulse throbs in the neck. But everyone in that room, priests, family, even you, despite your modern skepticism, experienced something. Maybe just theatre, maybe suggestion, maybe the power of collective belief creating a shared reality where iron from stars and blood from calves genuinely breach the wall between here and whatever comes after. The Egyptians would insist there's no maybe about it. They'd tell you that mummy's already waking up, already testing its restored senses, already beginning the journey that will take it through judgment and into eternity. And who's to say they're wrong? You weren't there when the Ka departed, so how can you be certain you witnessed its return? You're standing in the private quarters of a palace at Memphis, watching servants arrange a peculiar dinner party. The table is set with extraordinary care. Dishes of roasted duck, bowls of figs glistening with honey, fresh bread still steaming from the ovens, jars of beer with their clay seals just broken. The linens are perfect. The lotus flowers in the centerpiece are arranged with geometric precision. There's only one problem. The guest of honor is a wall, specifically a limestone false door carved with hieroglyphs and crowned with the image of a deceased official named Hatshepsut, who's been dead for 7 years but apparently still expects regular meals. False door feeding rituals represent one of ancient Egypt's most committed long-term performances, a daily theatre where the living serve elaborate meals to decorated slabs of stone, and everyone involved maintains absolute conviction that consumption is occurring. The doors themselves are architectural peculiarities, carved to look like functional doorways complete with recessed frames and lintel beams, but leading nowhere, sealed against the wall, a portal that opens only in dimensions the living can't perceive. The Egyptians positioned them in tomb chapels and memorial temples, creating designated zones where the boundary between worlds supposedly thinned enough that the Ka could reach through and snatch the essence of offerings. You watch as the head servant, his title translates roughly as superintendent of the Ka chapel, approaches with the first dish. He doesn't simply place it before the false door. He performs a presentation, holding the duck aloft, rotating it so Hatshepsut's carved eyes can view it from all angles, announcing in a clear voice, "An offering which the king gives to Osiris, lord of Busiris, that he may give a voice offering of bread, beer, oxen and fowl to the Ka of the honoured Hatshepsut." The formula is ancient, probably older than the pyramids, and it's repeated with such frequency across Egyptian funerary contexts that scribes developed shorthand hieroglyphs for the whole phrase. The food sits there. Hours pass, the bread cools, the beer goes flat, flies begin investigating the duck with professional interest. And here's the theological sleight of hand that makes the whole system work. The Ka doesn't consume the physical food, it consumes the food's essence, its nutritional spirit, leaving the material substance intact. By late afternoon, when it's clear that Tarshepses has had ample opportunity to feed, the servants will collect all the food and redistribute it, some to the priests who maintain the chapel, some to the servants themselves, some to the poor who gather outside hoping for precisely this kind of divine leftovers. Everyone eats, nothing is wasted, and the fiction that the dead are being sustained remains intact. But calling it fiction feels reductive when you see the genuine anxiety on the face of Tarshepses' grandson, who's personally funded this daily ritual for nearly a decade. He's terrified of what might happen if the offerings stop. Egyptian afterlife theology was clear. K-spirits required sustenance. Starve them, and they'd either fade into non-existence, a second, permanent death, or worse, they'd turn vengeful, haunting the living, souring milk, causing nightmares, maybe even possessing the weak-minded. You can see this fear codified in legal documents, where people bequeath agricultural estates, specifically for funding perpetual offerings, essentially creating endowments that would keep their K-fed for eternity, or at least until the endowment ran out or the priest got lazy. The false door itself is a masterpiece of symbolic architecture. You step closer to examine it, and the superintendent doesn't stop you. Everyone's allowed to witness offerings because public feeding establishes that the deceased remains important, still worthy of respect and resources. The door's lintel shows Tarshepses seated before an offering table, piled impossibly high with food, a hieroglyphic fantasy of abundance. The jams list his titles: Overseer of the Treasury, Keeper of the King's Secrets, Beloved of his Lord. Below, in the recessed panel that represents the actual doorway, Tarshepses appears again, this time striding forward with the confident gait of someone passing through the portal, reaching from the afterlife into this realm to accept what's being offered. Historians still argue about when Egyptians started believing the false doors actually functioned, versus when they recognized them as elaborate symbolic structures. Early dynastic tombs sometimes show what appear to be functional doors later sealed with stone, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, the very first K-feeding involved opening actual doors, placing food inside burial chambers, then sealing them again. But that system would be horrifyingly impractical. You'd break the tomb seal daily, exposing the mummy to humidity and decay. The false door solved this by maintaining the conceptual doorway while eliminating the structural nightmare. It's brilliant, really, the way it satisfies religious requirements while acknowledging physical reality. The superintendent places the last dish, a small pyramid of dates, and steps back. He claps his hands 3 times, a signal that the offering is complete and the car may approach. Then everyone withdraws a respectful distance, turning their backs to give Tarshepses privacy for his meal. This isn't scriptural requirement. You won't find it in the pyramid texts or the Book of the Dead. It's just good manners, the kind of courtesy you'd extend to any dinner guest, applied to one who happens to be dead and eating through a dimensional portal in the wall. You glance around the car chapel and notice something interesting. Tarshepses isn't the only one being fed. Smaller false doors line the walls, each belonging to family members, favoured servants, even a pet monkey that apparently held special significance. Each receives proportional offerings. The immediate family gets duck and beer, the servants get bread and onions, the monkey gets figs because presumably that's what monkeys eat in the afterlife too. The hierarchy of the living is perfectly reproduced in the feeding of the dead, because even in eternity, social structure must be maintained. A young child wanders into the chapel, maybe 5 years old, and asks his mother a question you can't quite hear. She kneels beside him, points to the false door, and you catch fragments of her explanation. Grandfather lives there now. Yes, he can taste it. When you're older, you'll help bring the offerings. The child looks skeptical, which is fair. He's being asked to believe that stone can eat and the dead can taste. But he'll grow up performing these rituals, and eventually he won't question them any more than you question that flipping a switch produces light. Cultural conditioning is powerful enough to make the impossible feel routine. Here's a detail that rarely makes it into museum placards. False door feeding wasn't just for the wealthy. Poorer Egyptians created their own versions using painted wood, or even just drawings on pottery shards. The theology didn't require expensive limestone. It required the intention, the ritual, the maintenance of connection between living and dead. Archaeologists have found workers' tombs at Deir el-Medina, where crude false doors received offerings of bread and beer just like their aristocratic counterparts. The K of a stoneworker needed feeding as much as the K of a vizier, and the gods didn't care if your portal was carved by master craftsmen or scratched onto broken pottery by your barely literate son. The superintendent returns to collect the offerings now. The appropriate time has elapsed, usually about 2 hours, enough for even a leisurely eater to finish, and Tarshepsi's essence has presumably extracted what it needed from the feast. The superintendent divides the food according to long-established custom. The duck goes to the senior priest, the bread to the chapel cleaners, the beer to the gate guards, the figs to whoever happens to be standing around looking hungry. It's an efficient redistribution system disguised as religious ritual, and you realize that false door feeding serves multiple purposes simultaneously. It comforts the living, theoretically sustains the dead, employs a small army of priests and servants, and ensures that surplus food flows to those who need it. As you leave the chapel, you notice fresh scratches on the false door's threshold. Small marks that might be erosion, or might be something else. The superintendent catches you looking and smiles. The car's footprints, he explains. When they come through to eat, they leave traces. You can see them if you look carefully. You can't, actually. You see random wear patterns consistent with thousands of visitors touching the stone over decades. But he sees proof of traffic between worlds, evidence that the dead still walk among the living every day at mealtime. And honestly, his interpretation makes the world more interesting, even if it doesn't make it more true. You're in a gilded chamber within the palace at Thebes, and what's about to unfold is part religious mystery play, part political propaganda, and part really committed improv theatre. Queen Amos is 9 months pregnant, and according to the official story, the one being rehearsed right now by a team of priests and actors, the father of her child isn't King Thutmose I, who's standing awkwardly in the corner looking like a man who's been told his role in this production is supportive background presence. No, according to the script being finalised on papyrus even as you watch, the father is Amun-Ra himself, king of the gods, who supposedly visited the queen in the night disguised as her husband, and conceived a child destined to rule with double-strength divine legitimacy. This is the divine birth ritual, and it's one of ancient Egypt's most audacious theological maneuvers, a state-sponsored narrative that transforms royal reproduction into cosmic event that elevates a standard-issue palace pregnancy into proof of divine favour. The queen isn't just giving birth, she's participating in a sacred drama that's been performed since the Old Kingdom, each generation adding new flourishes, new details, until the ritual has become so elaborate it requires stage directions carved into temple walls so future pharaohs can recreate it properly. The chief priest, his title is Servant of Amun, but everyone calls him the director because that's functionally what he is, walks through the blocking with his cast. There are 15 actors involved, someone to play Amun, wearing a ram-headed mask that must weigh 30 pounds, someone to play Thoth, ibis head, looking equally uncomfortable, various attendant deities, palace servants who'll witness the divine visitation, and the Queen herself, who's both actor and audience, performing a role while simultaneously experiencing its supposed reality. The line between theatre and theology has been so thoroughly dissolved that trying to separate them would be like unscrambling an egg. When Amun enters, the director explains, you'll smell the incense intensify. That's the signal. Queen Amos, you'll already be on the birthing stool, and you'll indicate that you sense a divine presence. Not dramatically. We're going for subtle recognition, not shock. Remember, you're not surprised because on some level, you've always known this child was special. The Queen nods, her face serene despite the physical discomfort of late pregnancy. She's been preparing for this performance for months, studying the temple reliefs at Deir el-Bahari, where Hatshepsut's own divine birth is depicted in meticulous detail, learning the gestures and expressions that communicate divine encounter. The room where this will actually occur has been prepared with obsessive attention to symbolic detail. Blue lotus flowers associated with divine conception fill every alcove. The walls have been painted with scenes from the mythology, Amun consulting with Thoth about creating a perfect child, Amun approaching the Queen's chamber, the moment of conception rendered in images tasteful enough for public temple walls, yet explicit enough that everyone understands what's being claimed. There's even a scene showing the god Khnum at his potter's wheel, literally forming the royal fetus and its K from clay, because apparently divine conception still requires some manufacturing infrastructure. Here's where the ritual gets psychologically interesting. Everyone involved knows this is performance, right? The king knows he's the biological father. The priests know they're staging a show. But the framework of Egyptian religious thought doesn't see this as fraud. It sees it as revealing a deeper truth that mundane events conceal. Yes, the queen conceived through normal human reproduction, but the ritual reveals the cosmic significance of that act. The divine will operating through human bodies. It's not lying, it's interpretation. An interpretation at a level where the boundary between historical fact and theological meaning becomes irrelevant. You watch a rehearsal now. The actor playing Amun enters from the left, moving with the slow, deliberate gait that Egyptian art always gives to deities. That stiff-legged stride that looks unnatural but reads as divine in cultural context. He approaches the Queen's chamber while other actors, playing palace servants, kneel and avert their eyes. The director calls out corrections. More majesty, less hurry. You're a god, not a messenger. And remember, your scent should arrive before you do. Someone make sure the incense bearer is positioned correctly. The Queen practices a response, reaching out one hand in a gesture that suggests both welcome and wonder, her expression carefully calibrated to show someone who recognizes she's in the presence of something greater than human, but isn't terrified because this visitation was destined, prophesied, ordained by cosmic order itself. It's a difficult performance. Too much awe looks like fear. Too little looks like she's not taking the moment seriously. She rehearses it 7 times before the director is satisfied. Historians still argue about when these divine birth rituals shifted from private religious experience to public political theatre. Some early pharaohs might have genuinely believed, or at least experienced religious visions convincing enough to qualify as genuine belief, that gods participated in royal conception. Later rulers clearly weaponized the ritual as propaganda. The particularly pharaohs with shaky legitimacy claims. Hatshepsut, facing skepticism about a female ruler, commissioned the most elaborate divine birth sequence ever carved, documenting every step of Amun's visitation to her mother. The message was clear: dispute my right to rule, and you're disputing the gods themselves. The rehearsal continues. Now they're practicing the moment after birth, when the infant will be presented to the god Amun, same actor still sweating inside the ram mask. The script calls for Amun to cradle the newborn and declare, "My beloved son, king of the two lands, you are my heir, born of my divine essence." In reality, a priest will hold the baby while the actor playing Amun makes the pronouncement, but the audience, nobles and officials summoned to witness, will see it as divine acknowledgement, cosmic authority bestowed directly without messy human intermediaries like succession councils or military coups. You notice that King Thutmose III is now consulting with the director, making suggestions about lighting, more torches near the birth chamber to create dramatic shadows, and you realise he's not bitter about being narratively replaced. He's collaborating enthusiastically, because this fiction elevates his child, secures the succession, and associates his reign with divine favour. He gets to be the earthly father of a god-born pharaoh, which isn't nothing. It's actually a pretty good supporting role in the grand theatre of royal legitimacy. The Queen's attendants are rehearsing their parts now. 7 women who will assist at the birth and then testify to the miraculous circumstances. Their dialogue has been scripted. The scent of lilies filled the room. Light seemed to emanate from her body. The child emerged not crying but laughing. These details will be repeated at court, recorded by scribes, eventually carved into temple walls where they'll achieve the permanence of stone and the authority of architectural truth. Repeat a story enough times in enough formats, and it stops being story and becomes history, or at least becomes indistinguishable from history to everyone except the original participants, who'll mostly take the secret to their tombs. There's a final element to the divine birth ritual that's even more bizarre than the divine conception claim: the divine nursing. After the baby is born, the goddess Hathor in cow form supposedly suckles the infant, imparting divine essence through milk. In the actual performance, a sacred cow, specially selected, consecrated and garlanded, is brought into the birth chamber, and the newborn is held to its udder. Whether the baby actually nurses doesn't matter. The symbolic transfer occurs regardless. You watch now as handlers practice manoeuvring the cow, surprisingly docile, possibly drugged with something herbal, into position while the director frets about logistics. If the cow defecates during the ceremony, we'll interpret it as a blessing. Hathor providing fertilizer for the kingdom's future crops. Spin everything. There are no accidents in divine ritual, only signs we haven't properly interpreted yet. As the rehearsal winds down, the director addresses the full cast. Remember, what we're creating here isn't just theatre, it's the foundation of divine kingship for the next generation. Every gesture, every word becomes truth once carved into temple walls. We're not depicting reality, we're creating it. And there it is, the core philosophy that makes Egyptian ritual so fascinatingly alien. The belief that performed truth and actual truth are functionally identical. That by staging divine intervention elaborately enough, you're not faking cosmic significance, but rather making it manifest. The Queen rises carefully from the birthing stool prop, one hand on her swollen belly, and you see her smile. Not the ritual smile she's been rehearsing, but something genuine, almost mischievous. She knows exactly what's being constructed here, this elaborate framework that will protect her child from succession disputes and assassination plots by wrapping the baby in so many layers of divine legitimacy that attacking the child means attacking the gods. It's manipulation of the highest order, but it's also a mother protecting her offspring using every tool her culture provides. You're standing in a tomb that hasn't been sealed yet, watching a pharaoh rehearse his own funeral. Specifically, you're watching Senusret III, who's 54 years old and in reasonably good health, descend into his burial chamber and lie down in his sarcophagus to make sure it fits properly. This isn't morbid curiosity. This is the said festival dummy burial, one of the most psychologically complex rituals in the Egyptian ceremonial calendar, where living pharaohs perform their own death rites as a form of magical rehearsal, cosmic insurance policy, and possibly the world's earliest attempt at exposure therapy for mortality anxiety. The sarcophagus is granite, carved from a single block quarried at Aswan and transported north via barge, a journey that took 4 months and cost 2 workers their lives when ropes snapped during loading. Senusret climbs in awkwardly. There's no dignified way to enter your own coffin, and lies flat, hands crossed over his chest in the traditional pose. His eyes are open, staring at the vaulted ceiling where artists have painted a sky full of stars, and you can see him counting his breaths, watching his chest rise and fall, very deliberately reminding himself that he's still breathing, still alive, that this is performance, not prophecy. The Sem priests begin chanting the funeral liturgy, the same words they'll say over his actual corpse someday, and the cognitive dissonance is stunning. They're blessing his journey to the afterlife while he's visibly, audibly alive, breathing in time with their intonations. May you wake in peace, they chant. May your bear fly forth by day and return by night. May you eat bread in the presence of Osiris. Senusret's face remains impassive, but you notice his jaw tighten slightly when they reach the part about the weighing of the heart, the judgment that determines whether he'll achieve immortality or be devoured by Amit, the soul-eating demon. The dummy burial is theoretically part of the Hebsed festival. You remember that exhausting run around boundary stones, but it's evolved into something more elaborate and more psychologically loaded. The idea is that by symbolically dying and being reborn during his lifetime, the pharaoh cheats actual death, or at least familiarizes himself with its procedures enough that when the real moment comes, his K will know exactly what to do. It's like a fire drill for the afterlife, except the fire is your own mortality, and the drill involves lying in darkness while priests seal you in stone. Because yes, they're going to seal the tomb. Not permanently, there's a false wall that can be dismantled easily. But for the duration of the ritual, which can last anywhere from a few hours to a full night, Senusret will be entombed in absolute darkness, with only the sound of his own breathing and the muffled chanting of priests outside. You watch as workers position the granite door, already carved with warnings about disturbing royal rest, and begin mortaring it into place. Senusret's breathing quickens slightly. You can see it even from the entrance. But he doesn't call out, doesn't abort the ritual. To show fear now would be to suggest he fears death itself, and a pharaoh who fears death is a pharaoh whose divine nature is questionable. Historians still argue about how widespread this practice was, and whether all pharaohs participated or just the particularly pious, or particularly neurotic ones. Some said festival reliefs show the pharaoh lying on a funerary bed with mourners surrounding him, clearly depicting a death ritual being performed on a living person. Other sources are ambiguous, describing the sleep of renewal without clarifying whether actual burial occurred. The psychological impact must have been profound. Lying in darkness, enclosed in stone, experiencing the claustrophobic reality of tomb confinement, while still possessing the consciousness to fear it. The granite door slides into its final position, and suddenly the only light comes from oil lamps the priests left burning inside, a concession to safety that wouldn't exist in actual death. You hear the workers outside mixing mortar, packing it into the seams, creating an authentic-looking seal. Inside, Senusret can hear it too. The scrape of trowels, the murmur of priestly instruction, the sounds of his own premature burial. The lamps will burn for approximately 6 hours before exhausting their oil, and then he'll experience true tomb darkness, the absolute absence of light that the dead endure eternally. What's he thinking in there? The priests say he's meditating on the pyramid texts, mentally rehearsing the spells that will navigate him through the underworld's challenges. He's visualizing the Hall of Judgment, practicing his declaration of innocence. I have not killed, I have not stolen, I have not caused pain, I have not made anyone weep. He's preparing his heart for the weighing, conditioning it to remain light and true when placed on the scales against Ma'at's feather. That's the official story. Unofficially, he's probably terrified, fighting claustrophobia, wondering if the priests remembered to build the false wall correctly, if the oxygen will hold out, if this entire ritual is divinely inspired wisdom, or just elaborate hazing that somehow became religious tradition. You're now in the antechamber with the priests, and they're performing their parts of the ceremony. Every hour they chant the waking spells, incantations meant to rouse the deceased's ka and guide it toward resurrection. Between spells they're surprisingly casual, sharing bread and beer, gossiping about palace politics, occasionally pressing their ears against the granite to make sure Senusret is still moving around in there. One priest admits this is his third dummy burial supervision, and he's never had a pharaoh actually complete the full night. They usually signal for release after 4 or 5 hours by tapping on a bronze gong left inside for precisely that purpose. But Senusret isn't tapping. Hours pass. The sun sets outside and the antechamber grows cold. The priests bundle in their leopard skins and continue chanting, though you can hear exhaustion creeping into their voices. 6 hours. 7. The oil lamps inside the burial chamber have definitely exhausted by now, meaning Senusret is experiencing authentic tomb conditions, absolute darkness, recycled air, the weight of stone and earth, and cultural expectation pressing down on him. Still no gong. Around the 8th hour, one of the younger priests whispers what everyone's thinking. What if he's actually died in there? It's not impossible. The chamber isn't airtight, but it's close. Panic could trigger a heart event. The Sem priest silences the speculation with a glare, but you notice he moves closer to the wall, listening intently. Finally, just before dawn, the bronze gong sounds. 3 clear strikes that echo through stone the agreed-upon signal. The workers scramble to dismantle the false wall, pulling away stones and mortar with a speed that suggests they've been anxious too. Light floods into the burial chamber, and there's Senusret standing now, dishevelled, his ceremonial kilt askew, but alive and apparently triumphant. His face is difficult to read. Exhaustion certainly, but also something like exhilaration. The look of someone who's confronted a primal fear and survived. The priests begin the resurrection chant. He has awakened. He is renewed. He is young again, reborn as Ra reborn each dawn. They help him from the sarcophagus, which he exits far less gracefully than he entered, and process him out of the tomb into the sunrise, where nobles have gathered to witness the symbolic resurrection. The pharaoh who emerges from the tomb is theoretically the same person who entered, but richly renewed, having experienced death and return, carrying now an understanding of the afterlife that living humans normally never access. It's brilliant psychology, really. By rehearsing the thing you fear most, you reduce its power. Senusret has now died and been resurrected, which means when actual death comes, it'll be familiar territory, a journey he's already mapped. Whether that's comforting or horrifying probably depends on how well the experience went. Here's a detail that rarely gets discussed. Not all pharaohs survived their dummy burials. At least 3 sources reference rulers who entered the symbolic tomb and never emerged alive, either from heart failure, suffocation, or possibly accidents with the sealing mechanisms. These deaths were invariably reinterpreted as actual divine transformation. The pharaoh hadn't died, he descended directly to the afterlife without bothering with the intermediate step of aging further. His body would be properly mummified, obviously, but the narrative would emphasize that he'd achieved such spiritual mastery during the said festival that the gods simply took him directly. Spin, even in the face of ritual tragedy. As Senusret processes through the crowd, you notice he's smiling. Not the formal smile of statuary, but something genuine and slightly wild. The expression of someone who's just completed an ordeal and isn't entirely sure it was worth it, but is committed to pretending it was. Later today, there will be feasting, ceremonial races, the full said festival program, but this moment, this emergence from voluntary entombment, will be the part everyone remembers, the part that gets carved into temple walls with captions reading, "His Majesty, renewed and young, having defeated death through the power of Maat." And technically, if you survive your own funeral, that's not even propaganda, that's just accurate reporting. You're in the pharaoh's private chambers just before dawn, and what you're witnessing is less a person waking up and more a deity being assembled from component parts. Rameses II, who's been asleep for maybe 4 hours after staying up late reviewing grain taxation reports, is currently lying motionless on his bed, while a team of 7 priests and attendants hover around him like a pit crew preparing a race car. This is the daily rebirth ritual, and it happens every single morning without exception, because according to Egyptian theology, the pharaoh doesn't just wake up. He recreates the moment of cosmic creation, reenacting Ra's emergence from the primordial waters, transforming from dormant potential into active divine force. The chief attendant, his title translates as Keeper of the Royal Morning, approaches the bed and begins the liturgy in a voice barely above a whisper. "Awaken in peace, living image of Ra. The eastern horizon grows bright with your glory." Rameses doesn't move yet. This isn't sleeping through your alarm. This is waiting for the ritual cue, because opening your eyes before the proper invocation would break the symbolic pattern, would suggest you're just a regular person waking up, rather than a cosmic force returning to manifestation. The attendant repeats the phrase 3 times, each iteration slightly louder, and on the 3rd recitation, Rameses opens his eyes. Slowly, with theatrical deliberation, his gaze focusing on the eastern window where dawn light is just beginning to filter through linen curtains. Now the bathing begins, and it's not just washing. It's purification that recreates the act of emerging from the nun, the dark waters that existed before creation. Attendants carry in 4 jars of water, each from a different source: the Nile, a sacred lake at Karnak, a well at Heliopolis, and morning dew collected from lotus flowers. The mixture of sources isn't random. Its geography is theology, combining waters from across Egypt into a liquid representation of the unified kingdom. They pour it over Rameses' hands first, and he speaks the required formula. "I cleanse my hands of the sleep death. I wash away the weakness of night." His voice is hoarse from sleep, slightly nasal, Very human sounds emerging from someone who's supposed to be channeling solar divinity. The washing continues for nearly 20 minutes, each part of the body addressed in sequence with accompanying incantations. When they reach his face, the attendants use a cloth soaked in natron solution, the same substance used to desiccate corpses during mummification, which creates a weird symbolic loop where the living pharaoh is being treated with embalming materials as part of his daily routine. The natron stings slightly. You can see Ramesses flinch, though he catches himself and returns to impassive dignity. One attendant dries his face while another presents a bronze mirror, and Ramesses looks at his reflection while reciting, "I see myself as Ra sees himself, renewed, eternal, unchanging." The irony is that he's aging visibly. He's 53 now, with lines deepening around his eyes and his hairline receding. But the ritual insists on eternal youth, so eternal youth it is. Now comes the dressing, and this is where the daily rebirth ritual reveals itself as ancient Egypt's most elaborate game of divine dress-up. The clothing isn't just functional. Each piece carries symbolic weight and must be donned in precise order. First, the royal linen kilt, so finely woven it's nearly transparent, pleated in a specific pattern that represents, depending on which priest you ask, either the rays of the sun or the ripples of the nun. An attendant ties it while reciting, "You're clothed in the garments of Ra, wrapped in the linen of eternity." Then the belt embedded with carnelian scarabs, each one representing a year of Ramesses' reign, and also doubling as a tally of years he's successfully maintained Ma'at. The jewellery comes next, and this is where things get excessively complicated. Ramesses doesn't just put on a necklace, he receives the golden collar of solar dominion, which weighs approximately 7 pounds and requires 2 attendants to position correctly. Then the arm cuffs, the ankle bands, the finger rings, each piece accompanied by its own mini-ceremony and declaration. The golden bands embrace you as the 2 ladies embrace the 2 lands. You're starting to understand why pharaohs need to wake up 2 hours before they actually need to appear in public. Getting dressed takes forever, when every garment application requires theological justification. Historians still argue about how much of this daily ritual was authentic religious practice versus courtly theatre designed to reinforce hierarchy. Certainly by the New Kingdom, when bureaucracy had evolved to the point where viziers handled most administrative work, the pharaoh's primary job was being pharaoh, performing divinity for an audience that needed constant reminding of cosmic order. The daily rebirth served this purpose perfectly. Every courtier who witnessed it, every servant who participated, came away reinforced in the belief that this wasn't just a man. This was a living god whose morning routine literally sustained the universe. Now the makeup begins, and yes, pharaohs wore makeup. Elaborate, time-consuming, symbolically loaded makeup that would take modern beauty influencers an hour to replicate even with better technology. The chief cosmetician approaches with a palette containing green malachite powder and begins applying it to Ramesses' eyelids. The green represents vegetation, rebirth, the fertile Nile Valley reclaimed from desert chaos each year. It's also an effective sunblock and insect repellent, because sometimes practical and symbolic purposes align beautifully. The cosmetician works with absolute concentration, creating the distinctive Egyptian eye shape that extends well past the natural lid, terminating in dramatic wings that make Ramesses' eyes look larger, more penetrating, more godlike. Next comes the black coal, ground from galena and mixed with oil into a paste that's applied to line the eyes and create that characteristic heavy-lidded look. The black represents the fertile black soil of Egypt, Kemet, the black land, as opposed to the red land of the desert, and also serves the practical function of reducing glare in a country where sunlight is weaponized by geography. The cosmetician applies it with a bronze applicator, working so close to Ramesses' eyeball that one flinch could cause injury, but pharaohs learn early not to flinch. Showing discomfort during the daily rebirth would be admitting that divine transformation hurts, which would rather undermine the whole theological framework. Red ochre goes on the lips and cheeks now, mixed with fat into a pomade that smells of roses and cinnamon. The red represents blood, life force, the vital energy that animates flesh. An attendant uses his finger to blend it into Ramesses' skin, and you notice the technique is remarkably sophisticated. They're actually contouring, using darker shades along the jawline to create the appearance of stronger bone structure, lighter shades on the cheekbones to catch light. Whether this is ancient vanity or ritual requirement is probably a distinction without difference. Making the pharaoh look powerful serves both personal and political purposes simultaneously. The false beard comes last, and it's the most obviously artificial element of the entire ensemble. It's a plaited construction of real hair mixed with gold thread, shaped into a cylinder about 6 inches long and affixed to Ramesses' chin with a strap that loops over his ears and across his shaved head. It looks exactly as ridiculous as that description suggests, and yet within Egyptian visual language it reads as divine kingship, so powerfully that even foreign ambassadors, who must find it bizarre, learn to recognize it as the ultimate symbol of pharaonic authority. Ramesses strokes it once, checking the attachment, and nods approval. The final step is the crown selection, and this varies depending on what Ramesses has scheduled for the day. Today he'll be receiving foreign tribute, so he chooses the blue crown, the kepresh, a tall blue war crown studded with gold discs that make him look vaguely like a cosmic bowling pin, but a very authoritative cosmic bowling pin. 2 attendants lift it carefully, position it on his head, and secure it while reciting, "You wear the crown as Ra wears the sun disk, as Horus wears the victory, as Osiris wears eternity." And now, finally, nearly 2 hours after the initial awakening, Ramesses stands. He's been transformed from a sleeping human into a walking symbol, every inch of him calculated to communicate divine authority. He tests his weight, adjusts the hang of his kilt, and speaks his first non-liturgical words of the day. The beard strap is too tight. Adjust it before the audience. The keeper of the royal mourning rushes to comply, and the moment of mundane complaint, of itching, of physical discomfort, punctures the ritual solemnity just enough to remind you that underneath all the theology and cosmetics and symbolic dressing, there's still a person who has to get through the day wearing 7 pounds of jewellery and a fake beard that chafes. The daily rebirth complete, Ramesses processes toward the throne room where the actual work of being pharaoh awaits. But the transformation has happened, the cosmic reset has occurred, and everyone who participated has reaffirmed their role in maintaining the pattern that keeps Egypt stable, prosperous, aligned with Ma'at. Tomorrow morning the entire ritual will repeat. Same words, same gestures, same transformation from sleeping human to manifest deity. It's Groundhog Day as theological principle, the idea that cosmic order requires daily renewal, that divinity isn't a permanent state, but a performance that must be continuously maintained through precise repetition. And if that sounds exhausting, well, nobody said being a living god was easy. You're in a temple courtyard at Thebes, and spread across the limestone paving stones before you are approximately 300 pottery bowls, each one freshly inscribed with names, and every single name belongs to someone the pharaoh wants cosmically destroyed. This is an execration text ceremony, and it represents ancient Egypt's attempt to weaponize writing itself, to transform language from communication tool into curse delivery system. The bowls aren't decorative, they're ammunition in a magical war being waged against Egypt's enemies through the systematic destruction of their written names. A senior lector priest, the title means carrier of the ritual book, and he's clutching a papyrus scroll that's clearly seen heavy use, reads from a master list of targets. The Nubians of Kush and all their plots, the Asiatics of Rejenu and all their schemes, the Libyans of Chehenu and all their rebellions. As he calls each name, a junior scribe verifies that a corresponding bowl has been prepared. The inscriptions aren't artistic, they're crude, scratched quickly into the red clay before firing, because what matters isn't aesthetics, but the act of binding the name to the vessel. You pick up one bowl and read, "The chieftain Abisha and all his followers who might rebel, who might plot, who might think evil thoughts against Egypt." The specificity is striking. They're not just cursing people, but precursing potential actions, trying to smother rebellion before it even coheres into conscious thought. The pharaoh himself, Senusret III, who you remember from his dummy burial ordeal, stands at the edge of the bowl field wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt and holding a ceremonial mace that's both symbol and functional weapon. He's surrounded by priests, military commanders, and carefully selected witnesses. Foreign ambassadors forced to watch what happens to enemies of Egypt, nobles whose loyalty is being tested through their participation, and a handful of common people who won a sort of terrible lottery to witness state-sanctioned curse magic. The atmosphere is tense, almost electrical, because what's about to happen crosses the boundary from ritual into violence, from symbol into satisfying physical destruction. The lector priest completes his reading and nods to Senusret. The pharaoh raises the mace, its gold-plated bronze, heavy enough to require both hands, and brings it down on the first bowl. The pottery explodes in a spray of red shards, and the sound echoes off the temple walls like breaking bone. The crowd gasps, not from surprise but from something deeper, a visceral response to seeing destruction formalized, made sacred. Senusret moves to the next bowl, then the next, establishing a rhythm. Smash. Pause. Smash. Pause. Each destruction is announced by the lector priest. Thus perishes the Nubian chief Awaka. Thus perishes the Asiatic prince Iakub. Thus perishes all who would disturb Ma'at. But Senusret can't possibly smash 300 bowls himself. That would take hours and constitute a truly bizarre workout regimen for a living god. After he's destroyed perhaps 20, establishing the pattern and lending his personal K-power to the ceremony, he passes the mace to his generals, who take turns smashing clusters of bowls representing their specific enemies. The general responsible for the Western Desert campaigns goes after the Libyan bowls with particular enthusiasm, grunting with effort, working out some battlefield trauma through ritualized pottery destruction. Another general, tasked with securing the northeastern frontier, methodically crushes every bowl inscribed with Asiatic names, his face set in concentration that suggests he's visualizing actual faces matching the written names. Historians still argue about what Egyptians actually believed was happening during execration ceremonies. Was it pure psychology, intimidating enemies through theatrical demonstration of Egypt's willingness to curse them? Was it magical thinking, genuine belief that destroying a written name could harm its bearer? Or was it something in between, a sophisticated understanding that symbols shape reality, that the act of cursing someone changes how you and others perceive them, which in turn affects political and military outcomes. The Egyptians themselves probably wouldn't have recognized these as separate categories: magic, politics, psychology, all one seamless fabric in a worldview where words carried inherent power, and writing was technology for capturing and manipulating that power. The smashing continues. Some priests have joined in now, using smaller mallets, working through the hundreds of remaining bowls with systematic efficiency. The courtyard is filling with pottery shards, creating a crunchy carpet of crushed clay and destroyed names. You notice that some bowls contain more than names. They include descriptions of the enemy's supposed characteristics: the treacherous one, the liar, the oath-breaker. By inscribing not just identity but attributes, the curse gains specificity, targets not just the person, but their capacity for the behaviours Egypt fears. It's sophisticated curse technology, refining the weapon for maximum magical efficiency. Here's a detail that makes the whole ritual even more unsettling. Some of the bowls contain Egyptian names. Not many, maybe 15 out of 300, but they're there, inscribed alongside foreign enemies. These are internal threats, nobles suspected of disloyalty, priests who've challenged royal authority, administrators who've been caught embezzling, or who've simply made the wrong political enemies. Their names are being smashed right alongside Nubian chieftains and Asiatic princes, a not-so-subtle message that Egyptian identity won't protect you if you threaten pharaonic power. One bowl reads, "The official Senebhor and all his plots," and you wonder if Senebhor knows he's been cursed, if he's somewhere in Thebes right now feeling an inexplicable chill, or if he's already been arrested and this is just magical cleanup following judicial execution. The lector priest begins chanting now, a rhythmic incantation that transforms the physical destruction into cosmic event. As these vessels shatter, so shatter the plans of Egypt's enemies. As these shards scatter, so scatter their armies. As this clay returns to dust, so return their hopes to nothing. The chant has a hypnotic quality, and the smashing synchronizes to its rhythm. Crash on the downbeat, pause during the verses, crash again. It's oddly musical, this destruction, percussion composed of collapsing futures and demolished intentions. Not all execration ceremonies used bowls. You're watching the elaborate state-sponsored version, but archaeological evidence shows that Egyptians at all social levels practiced execration magic. Poorer practitioners used clay figurines, roughly human-shaped and inscribed with enemy names, then ritually broken or burned. Some execrations were buried in cemeteries, the negative energy directed downward into the realm of the dead. Others were thrown into water, the names dissolving as the clay softened, the curse diffusing through liquid into the broader world. The pharaonic bowl smashing is essentially the luxury version of a widespread practice, scaled up and made spectacular for political impact. The smashing has been going on for nearly an hour now, and the participants are visibly exhausted. Swinging mallets at pottery is genuinely tiring work, especially when you're wearing ceremonial robes and maintaining ritual posture. But they can't stop. All 300 bowls must be destroyed for the ceremony to be complete, for the curse net to close around all of Egypt's enemies simultaneously. Finally, with the sun now directly overhead, and the courtyard littered with pottery fragments, the last bowl shatters. The lector priest raises his arms and declares, "It is finished. Egypt's enemies are bound, their names broken, their car power scattered. Ma'at is restored." But the ritual isn't quite complete. Now comes the disposal of the shards, and this is where theory and practice diverge depending on which temple tradition you follow. Some schools insist the shards must be buried at the four corners of Egypt, literally planting the curse in the ground to create a protective barrier. Others argue for burning. Transforming clay back into its elemental components releases the curse energy most effectively. This particular ceremony opts for river disposal. Slaves are already scooping the shards into baskets, preparing to dump them into the Nile at sunset, where the current will carry them north toward the delta and eventually the Mediterranean, distributing the curse throughout all the waters that touch Egypt. As the crowd disperses, you notice one of the foreign ambassadors, a Nubian diplomat whose chieftain's name was almost certainly on one of the smashed bowls, maintaining a carefully neutral expression. He's just watched Egypt curse his homeland using magical technology his own culture recognizes and fears. He'll report this back to Kush, and the report will factor into political calculations. Do we raid Egypt's southern border? Do we seek diplomatic accommodation? The pharaoh who can command 300 curses and has priests literate enough to inscribe them all is a pharaoh whose magical infrastructure matches his military capability, and maybe open warfare isn't worth the risk. That's the genius of the execration ritual. It's simultaneously magic spell and political theatre and military deterrence, operating on multiple levels that reinforce each other. Whether the curses work in any supernatural sense is almost irrelevant. They work politically by demonstrating Egypt's commitment to destroying its enemies through every available technology, mundane and magical alike. The smashed bowls lying in baskets, waiting for river disposal, represent not just broken pottery, but broken intentions, shattered before they could coalesce into actual threat. And if that's not magic, it's something close enough that the distinction doesn't matter. You're in the palace dressing chamber watching something that shouldn't be necessary but absolutely is. Attendants are strapping a false beard onto Hatshepsut's chin, and the cognitive dissonance is deliberate, calculated, and utterly bizarre. Hatshepsut is female, undeniably, obviously female, and yet here she stands wearing the full regalia of male pharaonic power, including the ceremonial beard that's currently being secured to her face, with leather straps hidden beneath an elaborate wig. The beard is about 4 inches long, plaited and tubular, curving slightly at the end, and it looks exactly as odd as you'd imagine a false beard looks on anyone, but especially on a woman who's making no attempt to hide her femininity in any other respect. The chief dresser, an elderly man who's served 3 pharaohs and apparently has no problem serving a female one, tightens the straps with practiced efficiency. Too tight and it chafes, he explains to a younger attendant who's learning the procedure. Too loose and it shifts during ceremonies, which looks undignified. The goal is secure discomfort. She should feel it constantly, but it shouldn't draw blood. Hatshepsut stands perfectly still during this adjustment, her expression unreadable, though you catch a slight wince when the strap pulls against her ear. She's been wearing this contraption for nearly 20 years now, ever since she transitioned from regent for her nephew Thutmose III to full pharaoh in her own right. And it's never gotten comfortable, but comfort was never the point. The false beard isn't Hatshepsut's invention. It's been standard pharaonic equipment since the Old Kingdom, worn by every male ruler as a symbol of divine authority. The beard connects the wearer to Osiris, the bearded god of the afterlife, and to the stylized facial hair that Egyptian art gives to all deities. Real Egyptian men, somewhat ironically, generally shave their faces clean for hygiene and to deal with the heat, which meant that pharaohs wearing ceremonial beards were engaging in drag performance of a sort, dressing as gods rather than as humans, adopting divine aesthetic markers that transcended mundane masculine grooming. For Hatshepsut, the beard serves a similar but more complex function. She's not trying to pass as male. She's claiming male pharaonic authority while remaining visibly female, creating a third gender category that's specifically pharaoh. You watch as she tests the attachment, moving her jaw, tilting her head. The beard sways slightly but remains secure. Satisfied, she moves to the mirror, polished bronze, which gives everything a warm, slightly distorted glow, and examines her reflection. She's wearing a traditional male pharaonic kilt, her torso bare except for the elaborate pectoral collar that covers her chest, and yes, her breasts are visible beneath the jewellery. Early in her reign, sculptors and painters tried various solutions to this anatomical problem, binding her chest in reliefs, minimizing her breasts in statuary, occasionally just ignoring them entirely and giving her male proportions. But Hatshepsut apparently decided that was too much compromise. Her later monuments show her exactly as she appears now: female body, male regalia, beard firmly attached, daring anyone to suggest the combination is invalid. The false beard comes in multiple styles, and the one Hatshepsut wears today is the straight divine beard, the style associated with living pharaohs. There's also the curved ceremonial beard, longer and more ornate, typically worn during Jubilee festivals, and the plaited Osiris beard, which turns up at the end and is reserved for deceased or fully deified pharaohs. The distinctions matter because Egyptian visual language operates through precise symbolic codes, and mixing up your beard styles would be like wearing sneakers with a tuxedo. Technically possible, but sending all the wrong messages. Hatshepsut has mastered these codes so thoroughly that her beard game is impeccable, which is a sentence that makes more sense in context than it probably should. Historians still argue about how much resistance Hatshepsut faced for her beard-wearing female pharaoh routine. Some sources suggest her reign was controversial, pointing to the later defacement of her monuments by Thutmose III as evidence of contemporaneous opposition. Others argue she was widely accepted during her lifetime, and the defacements came decades later for complex political reasons unrelated to her gender. What's not debated is her strategic brilliance in adopting male pharaonic symbols without pretending to be male. She didn't claim to be a man. Her titles sometimes used feminine grammatical forms, and inscriptions occasionally called her king, but with feminine adjectives, creating grammatical hybrids that matched her visual presentation. The dresser now attaches the uraeus, that familiar cobra crown ornament, to her forehead, and you remember watching this same ritual with a male pharaoh. The procedure is identical: the golden serpent goddess, the careful positioning, the symbolic protection against enemies. Hatshepsut receives it with the same solemnity, and if anyone present thinks it's strange for a woman to wear the uraeus along with her false beard, they're keeping their opinions carefully private. This is the genius of Hatshepsut's approach. She didn't argue that women could be pharaoh, she simply became pharaoh and dared the institutional structure to stop her, adopting every single male symbol without justification or apology. But let's be clear, Hatshepsut wasn't the only female ruler to wear the ceremonial beard. Queens serving as regents occasionally donned it for specific ceremonies when they were acting in the pharaoh's place. Even goddesses wear it in religious art. You can find images of Isis with the divine beard, emphasizing her role as powerful deity rather than simply feminine figure. The beard transcends biological sex. It's a marker of divine authority that happens to be coded masculine in normal contexts but becomes gender-neutral when pharaonic power requires it. Hatshepsut understood this fluidity and exploited it brilliantly. You follow her as she processes toward the throne room for a morning audience with foreign ambassadors. The beard bobs slightly with her walking rhythm, and you notice that people's eyes are drawn to it. It's the most obvious anomaly, the clearest signal that something unusual is happening with pharaonic gender presentation. But by wearing it consistently for 20 years, Hatshepsut has normalized the bizarre. The younger courtiers who've never known a ruler without a false beard probably don't even register it as strange anymore. It's just what pharaohs wear, male or female, because pharaoh is a job description that comes with a dress code, and the dress code includes the beard, end of discussion. Here's a detail that's both hilarious and profound. Archaeologists have found thousands of false beards in tombs and temples, and they show enormous variety in construction. Some are made from human hair, probably collected from temple workers and woven into plaits. Others use plant fibers, palm or flax, dyed black and stiffened with resin. The most elaborate include gold thread and semi-precious stone beads woven into the hair. They come in different lengths for different occasions, different widths for different symbolic purposes. There were beard specialists, artisans whose entire career involved crafting, maintaining and fitting these ceremonial facial accessories. Imagine introducing yourself at parties. I'm a royal beard engineer. I make fake beards for living gods. It's the kind of job that makes perfect sense within Egyptian culture and absolutely no sense anywhere else. Hatshepsut takes her seat on the double throne. She's left a space for Thutmose III, who technically co-rules with her, though everyone understands the power dynamics, and arranges her kilt so it falls properly. The beard shifts slightly as she settles, and she adjusts it with one finger, a casual gesture that's probably unconscious by now. Foreign ambassadors are announced, representatives from Punt, Nubia, the Levant, and they enter with gifts, tributes, and carefully negotiated trade proposals. Do they find it strange, this woman with her fake beard and her bare chest and her absolute authority? Probably. But they address her as His Majesty, because that's the protocol, because Pharaoh is grammatically masculine regardless of the ruler's biology, because Egyptian bureaucracy has adapted to accommodate Hatshepsut's innovations without particularly acknowledging them. One ambassador, from Punt bearing frankincense and myrrh, completes his formal greeting, and you notice he's looking directly at Hatshepsut's face, not at the beard, maintaining eye contact as he would with any monarch. This is respect masquerading as normalcy, the polite fiction that everyone in the room has agreed to maintain. The pharaoh wears a beard because pharaohs wear beards, and the pharaoh's gender is whatever the pharaoh says it is, and questioning any of this is politically unwise and theologically complicated. After the audience concludes and the ambassadors withdraw, Hatshepsut finally removes the beard. The straps have left red marks on her jawline and around her ears, visible evidence of the physical cost of maintaining symbolic authority. An attendant brings cooling salve, aloe and honey, and dabs it on the irritated skin. Hatshepsut closes her eyes during this treatment, a moment of vulnerability that she'd never show while bearded and throned. 20 years, she says quietly to no one in particular. You'd think I'd be used to it by now. The attendant doesn't respond, but you see sympathy in her expression. Recognition that some performances never stop being performances no matter how long you maintain them. Later, in her private chamber, Hatshepsut will commission more propaganda. Temple reliefs showing her divine birth, monuments emphasizing her legitimacy, inscriptions that carefully navigate the grammatical challenges of female pharaonic power. But the beard will remain her most powerful argument, the visual statement that transcends language. She wears the symbols because she wields the authority, and anyone who thinks the combination is invalid is welcome to challenge a pharaoh who successfully ruled Egypt for 2 decades while wearing facial hair that everyone knows isn't real, but everyone treats as sacred anyway. You're standing in a cattle pen outside Memphis, watching priests examine calves with the intensity of art critics, evaluating a disputed Rembrandt. They've been at this for 3 weeks, travelling up and down the Nile Valley inspecting thousands of young bulls, and they're searching for something incredibly specific. A calf that matches exactly 29 sacred markings that will qualify it to become the living embodiment of Ptah, the creator god himself. This is the Apis bull selection, and it's part religious scavenger hunt, part genetic lottery, part political theatre that transforms an ordinary cow into a deity that will live in luxury, receive worship from pharaohs, and eventually be mummified with more care than most humans. The head priest, his title is Overseer of the Mysteries of the Apis, holds a papyrus scroll that lists the required markings in exhaustive detail. He reads aloud as junior priests examine the current candidate: a black body, a white triangle on the forehead, a crescent moon shape on the right side, an eagle shape on the back, a scarab shape under the tongue. The list continues, growing increasingly implausible. By the time he reaches marking 23, double hairs in the tail, you're starting to suspect this whole system was designed to ensure that finding a qualifying calf would be rare enough to feel miraculous, but common enough to prevent decades-long divine vacancies. The calf being examined now is maybe 6 months old, black coat gleaming, eyes wide with confusion at all the attention. A junior priest pries open its mouth to check for the scarab-shaped mark under the tongue. And yes, there's something there, a pigmentation pattern that, with significant imagination and favourable lighting, might resemble a beetle. The priest marks his tablet. Another priest examines the tail, counting hairs with obsessive precision. The tension is building because this calf has matched 26 markings so far, which is closer than any candidate they've found in the 3 years since the last Apis died, and everyone's getting desperate because Egypt without a living Apis is Egypt slightly out of sync with cosmic order. The owner of the calf, a farmer named Tahemheb, who probably never imagined his cattle breeding program would intersect with state religion, stands nearby looking simultaneously proud and terrified. If his calf is selected, he'll receive compensation that will make him wealthy. Land grants, tax exemptions, a position in the temple hierarchy. His cow, the calf's mother, will also be honoured, kept in luxury for the rest of her life as the cow who bore the god. But there's pressure too, because if anyone discovers he somehow manipulated the markings, dyed the hair, tattooed the skin, anything to fake divine qualification, the punishment is death, and not the quick kind. The Egyptians take their sacred cattle selection very seriously. The overseer moves to the calf's back, examining the area where the eagle marking should appear. He stares at it for a long time, tilting his head, stepping closer, stepping back. Other priests crowd around, offering opinions. It's definitely wing-shaped, one suggests. The curve here could be the head. But eagles have talons. Where are the talons? The debate grows heated, voices rising, and you realise you're watching theological experts argue about whether a cow's hair pattern sufficiently resembles a bird. It's absurd and sacred simultaneously, and that seems to be Egyptian religion's natural state. Historians still argue about whether the 29 markings were genuinely required, or whether the system had built-in flexibility that let priests select politically convenient calves when necessary. Some scholars suggest the Apis selection was rigged, that calves from specific temple herds were pre-screened and groomed for selection, with markings interpreted generously to ensure a steady supply of divine bulls. Others insist the Egyptians took the criteria seriously and genuinely searched for naturally occurring sacred patterns. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Most selections probably followed genuine criteria, but in emergencies, when too many years passed without an Apis candidate, theological flexibility expanded to accommodate political necessity. The overseer finally announces his verdict. The eagle is present. The marking is valid. A collective exhale ripples through the assembled priests. They continue through the remaining markings, checking hoof structure, examining coloration patterns along the belly, even measuring the spacing between the calf's eyes, because apparently divine bulls have specific facial proportions. Everything checks out. All 29 markings are present, or at least present enough that trained priests squinting in good faith can confirm them. The overseer strikes his staff against the ground 3 times. The Apis lives. Ptah has returned to dwell among us. What happens next is organized chaos. The calf is immediately garlanded with flowers, draped in fine linen, and prepared for a procession that will take it from this humble cattle pen to the magnificent Apis sanctuary at Memphis. But first, there's purification. The calf is bathed in sacred water, anointed with oils, censed with frankincense until it's sneezing, divine sneezes presumably. The farmer Tahemheb is crying, overwhelmed by the honour and probably also calculating his new net worth. His cow, the Apis mother, is being decorated with her own garlands, mooing in confusion, but accepting the attention with bovine stoicism. The journey to Memphis takes 3 days because you can't rush a god, even a god with hooves who keeps stopping to eat grass. The procession includes priests, musicians, dancers, and crowds of Egyptians who line the route hoping for blessings. Touching the Apis as it passes supposedly grants fertility, good health, prosperity, all the standard divine benefits. People stretch out their hands as the calf walks by, and the Apis, being a calf, occasionally licks them, which sends the recipients into ecstatic joy. You're watching divinity being created in real time, an ordinary animal transformed into sacred being through collective belief and institutional validation. When the Apis reaches Memphis, it enters a sanctuary that makes royal palaces look modest. The bull receives a stable with walls inlaid with gold, feeding troughs made of alabaster, a private courtyard with a pool for bathing. Its diet is carefully regulated. Grain mixed with honey, fresh vegetables, specially prepared cakes. A team of priests tends to its every need, interpreting its moods as divine communication. If the Apis eats enthusiastically, it's a good omen for the harvest. If it's lethargic, priests consult oracles to determine what's disturbed it. Every aspect of its behavior is read as cosmic communication, which must be exhausting for a creature that probably just wants to chew cud in peace. The Apis also serves as an oracle, and this is where the ritual gets wonderfully weird. People bring questions. Should I marry this person? Will my business succeed? Is my illness curable? And present them to the priests who present them to the bull. The Apis' response is determined by its behavior. If it walks into the right-hand chamber of its sanctuary, the answer is yes. Left-hand chamber, no. If it refuses to move, the question is unclear, or the timing is wrong. It's an oracle system that gives a cow veto power over major life decisions, and apparently it worked well enough that people consulted the Apis for centuries without questioning whether their divine guidance was just bovine randomness. The Apis lives in this luxury until it dies, usually of natural causes around age 15, though there are whispers about occasional assisted departures when an Apis became ill or infirm, and the priest decided cosmic order required a timely transition to the next incarnation. When death comes, the mourning is intense. The Apis' body is mummified using techniques reserved for royalty: natron preservation, organ removal, wrapping in hundreds of yards of linen. The mummification takes 70 days, same as a pharaoh, and the funeral procession rivals any royal burial. The mummified Apis is interred in the Serapeum, an underground catacomb at Saqqara where massive granite sarcophagi, each weighing up to 60 tons, hold the remains of deceased Apis bulls stretching back centuries. You're in the Serapeum now, walking through tunnels carved from bedrock, and the sarcophagi line the walls like monuments to the world's most elaborate cattle cult. Each one represents an Apis that lived, was worshipped, died, and was buried with honours that most humans could never dream of achieving. Inside these stone boxes are mummified bulls wrapped in linen and amulets, their organs preserved in canopic jars, their bodies positioned for resurrection in the afterlife where presumably they'll continue serving as divine intermediaries, answering eternal questions with eternal randomness. Here's the part that makes modern sensibilities uncomfortable. The Apis cult wasn't fringe religion. It was mainstream, state-sponsored, pharaoh-endorsed theology. Kings made pilgrimages to visit the Apis, commissioned feeding rituals, funded the sanctuary's maintenance. When a new Apis was found, it was national news celebrated with festivals. The gap between worshipping cattle and sophisticated religion doesn't exist in Egyptian thought. The Apis wasn't just a cow, it was a vessel for divine presence, a living link between human and cosmic realms, a theological technology that happened to moo and require regular mucking out, but was no less sacred for its biological functions. As you emerge from the Serapeum into afternoon sunlight, you think about the current Apis, the one selected from Tahemheb's herd, now living in luxury at Memphis. It's probably lying in its golden stable right now, chewing cud, occasionally flicking flies with its tail, completely unaware that it's a god. And maybe that's the most Egyptian thing about the whole arrangement. Divinity doesn't require awareness, doesn't demand understanding. It just requires the right markings, the right ritual, the right collective agreement that this particular bull, among all bulls, is the one where God chose to live. Whether the bull agrees is irrelevant. Divine selection doesn't require consent, just accurate marking counts and priests who can convincingly identify eagles in random hair patterns. You're in the burial chamber of Unas, 5th pharaoh of the 5th dynasty, and you're reading something that makes your scholarly neutrality waver between fascination and visceral discomfort. The walls are covered in hieroglyphs, the famous pyramid texts, humanity's oldest religious writings, and buried within the resurrection spells and protective incantations are passages that, depending on how you translate them, either describe metaphorical spiritual consumption or suggest that pharaohs believed they literally ate gods to absorb their power. This is the cannibal hymn, and historians still argue whether it's shocking evidence of ritual cannibalism, elaborate poetic metaphor, or something in between that ancient Egyptian thought didn't bother distinguishing. The text is carved in vertical columns, painted green to represent resurrection and renewal, and you start reading, "The king feeds on gods, he eats their magic, he swallows their spirits." Already we're in uncomfortable territory, but it gets more explicit. The king is one who eats men and lives on gods. He who lassos them for the king and catches them for him. He who guts them for the king and cooks them for him in his evening meal. The imagery is vivid, disturbingly concrete. gods being captured like game animals, butchered, prepared for consumption. Either someone had a very dark sense of poetic metaphor, or Egyptian theology included components that make modern readers deeply uneasy. The chief priest who's guiding your tour of the pyramid, his name is Kemank and he's been studying these texts for 30 years, offers commentary that's carefully balanced between academic interpretation and theological respect. We must understand that eating in Egyptian thought often means absorbing, incorporating, making something part of yourself. When the text says the king eats the gods, it means he takes their attributes into himself, their power, wisdom, immortality. It's no different than Christians symbolically eating Christ's body, he pauses, except perhaps more explicit. But the text continues with details that strain metaphorical interpretation. He eats their entrails when they come with their bellies full of magic. He eats the red crown. He gulps down the green one. He feeds on the lungs of the wise ones. Specific body parts are mentioned, specific organs, specific divine attributes located in specific anatomical locations. Egyptian theology did associate different powers with different body parts. The heart contained intelligence and memory. The lungs contained breath and life force. So eating the lungs could mean absorbing life energy. But the graphic language suggests someone really wanted readers to visualize consumption, mastication, digestion of divine flesh. Historians still argue about whether any actual ritual cannibalism occurred in early dynastic Egypt. The archaeological evidence is ambiguous at best. Some Old Kingdom tombs show suspicious bone trauma and butchering patterns, but these could be from many causes: post-mortem damage, ritual defleshing, simple mishandling during burial. No clear evidence exists of prepared human remains in funerary feasts, but absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, especially when dealing with rituals that might have been rare, secret, and conducted in ways that left minimal archaeological traces. The cannibal hymn continues, and you're struck by how it frames divine consumption as both violent conquest and necessary transformation. The king has encompassed the two lands. He has taken possession of the hearts of the gods. He has eaten the knowledge of every god. This is power acquisition through internalization, the belief that consuming something grants you its properties. It's magical thinking, but it's also proto-biological reasoning. If you are what you eat, then eating gods makes you divine. The logic is flawless, even if the premise is disturbing. Kemank points to a particularly dense passage. Here, the king is described as having fiery breath from eating the gods. The heat of digestion, you see. Even in metaphor, the physiological process is acknowledged. The text wants us to understand that divine power is being metabolized, transformed from external force into internal attribute through the literal or figurative process of consumption. He's clearly given this lecture many times, but there's still excitement in his voice, the thrill of engaging with ideas so alien they force you to question assumptions about religion, power, and the boundaries of acceptable ritual practice. You notice something else about the cannibal hymn. It's not presented as shocking or transgressive within the text itself. There's no moral hand-wringing, no justification, no sense that the author thinks this needs defending. It's stated matter-of-factly, as if divine cannibalism is simply another tool in the Pharaoh's afterlife survival kit. No more remarkable than protective spells or resurrection incantations. This suggests that whatever the hymn describes, literal cannibalism, metaphorical power absorption, or visionary experience of consuming divine essence, was, to the Old Kingdom Egyptians, perfectly normal theology. Here's where modern scholarship gets tied in knots, trying to separate literal from metaphorical in a worldview that didn't make that distinction. Did Egyptians believe the king literally ate gods? Maybe, but literally meant something different in a theological framework where gods could be multiple things simultaneously, where symbols and their reference were functionally identical, where performing an action in ritual created the same reality as performing it physically. The king might eat a ritualized meal while priests recited the cannibal hymn, and through that combination of physical and verbal action, divine consumption occurred. Not metaphorically, not physically, but ritually, which was its own category of reality with its own rules. Some scholars connect the cannibal hymn to later Egyptian practices that are less controversial. In Middle Kingdom coffin texts and New Kingdom Book of the Dead passages, the deceased claims to have swallowed the 7 cobras or consumed the flame of the sun disk, clear metaphors for absorbing protective and transformative powers. Maybe the cannibal hymn is the original, more explicit version of this idea, toned down in later periods as Egyptian religion became more, let's say, diplomatically acceptable for a civilization increasingly engaged in international relations where bragging about eating gods might create awkward diplomatic moments. Or maybe, and this is the interpretation that makes K-Monk most animated, the cannibal hymn represents a specific historical moment when Egyptian kingship was consolidating power, when pharaohs needed to demonstrate absolute supremacy not just over humans, but over the divine realm itself. By claiming to consume gods, the pharaoh asserts dominance over the entire cosmic hierarchy. It's the ultimate flex. I don't just serve the gods, I eat them. I don't just receive divine power, I take it by force and incorporate it into my being. It's terrifying, audacious theology that makes perfect sense as propaganda for kings trying to establish absolute authority. You read another passage. The king appears as a god who lives on his fathers, who feeds on his mothers. And there it is, intergenerational divine cannibalism, consuming the very sources of life to become something beyond generation, beyond ancestry, self-creating and self-sustaining. It's Oedipal horror meets cosmic transformation, wrapped in poetic language that's simultaneously beautiful and disturbing. The text has rhythm, structure, literary artistry. This isn't crude magic. It's sophisticated poetry about consumption as metamorphosis. K-Monk mentions something that rarely makes it into popular discussions. The cannibal hymn wasn't used for every pharaoh. It appears in Unis's pyramid, then in a few subsequent Old Kingdom pyramids, but by the Middle Kingdom, it's largely absent from funerary texts. Why? Maybe it fell out of fashion. Maybe later pharaohs found its imagery too aggressive. Maybe the theological framework shifted away from conquest and consumption toward integration and harmony models of divine human relationship. Or maybe, and this is pure speculation, it described rituals that were quietly discontinued when the practical reality of maintaining cosmic order through divine cannibalism proved logistically or theologically untenable. What's undeniable is that the text exists, carved in stone, presenting divine cannibalism not as aberration but as fundamental to royal transformation. Whether Egyptians enacted this literally, symbolically, or visionally, they believed something significant was being communicated by these words. The cannibal hymn wasn't graffiti or heresy. It was expensive religious real estate carved into pyramid walls that took years to construct and decorate, preserved for eternity as essential knowledge for royal afterlife navigation. As you prepare to leave the burial chamber, K-Monk offers a final thought. Modern people want to know, did they really do it? Did pharaohs really eat gods? But that question assumes our categories, literal versus metaphorical, real versus symbolic, apply to ancient Egyptian thought. Maybe they did something we don't have words for, something that was neither eating nor not eating, neither metaphor nor reality, but a third thing that ritual creates. Maybe the better question isn't did they do it, but what world did they live in where doing it made sense? And with that philosophical bomb dropped, he leads you back toward the pyramid's entrance, leaving you to climb toward daylight while your brain tries to process the possibility that some civilizations achieved things, good or terrible or just deeply weird, that our conceptual frameworks can't quite capture. You're standing outside the royal palace at an awkward distance, trying not to stare while also trying to observe, because what's happening involves the pharaoh's bladder, and apparently that's a matter of state significance. Rameses III has just indicated through subtle gesture a slight shift in posture, a particular way of holding his crook and flail, that he needs to urinate, and immediately a small army of attendants springs into action, with the coordinated efficiency of a surgical team. This is the royal urine protocol, and it's one of ancient Egypt's most elaborate demonstrations that when you're a living god, even your waste products require ceremonial infrastructure. The chief keeper of the royal waters, yes, that's an actual position with actual responsibilities and presumably actual career advancement opportunities, approaches carrying a vessel that's far too ornate for its intended contents. It's gold, naturally, inlaid with lapis lazuli and carnelian, shaped like a lotus flower because apparently even pharaonic urine receptacles need to be symbolically loaded with meaning. The lotus represents rebirth and the sun's daily emergence from the waters of chaos, which creates some interesting theological implications when you're about to pee in it. The chief keeper kneels at a respectful distance, holding the vessel at precisely the correct angle, his face maintaining the expression of someone performing a sacred duty rather than holding a bedpan for a man with a full bladder. Rameses is escorted behind a portable screen, linen stretched across a gilded frame, decorated with protective symbols because divine modesty requires both privacy and warding magic, and you can hear the sound of royal urination hitting gold. It's surprisingly loud, echoing slightly, and nobody reacts because reacting would acknowledge that something undignified is occurring, and nothing the pharaoh does can be undignified by definition. The protocol requires that everyone present turn away, facing east toward the rising sun, maintaining the polite fiction that if nobody's looking, nothing is happening. It's magical thinking applied to basic biology. If the act isn't witnessed, did it occur in a way that compromises divine dignity? The urination concludes. There's a pause while presumably Rameses adjusts his kilt, and then the chief keeper emerges from behind the screen carrying the now full golden vessel with both hands, moving with the careful deliberation of someone transporting something precious, rather than something that just came out of a bladder. Here's where the protocol gets truly bizarre. The urine isn't simply discarded. It's sealed in that golden vessel and transported to a special chamber in the Temple of Ptah, where it's stored alongside other royal biological outputs in a system that's part medical archive, part magical insurance policy. Why store royal urine? The official explanation involves several interlocking beliefs that make sense only within Egyptian theological framework. First, everything that comes from the pharaoh's body contains divine essence, his sweat, tears, hair clippings, nail parings, and yes, his urine all carry fragments of his ka, his life force. Allowing these substances to fall into the wrong hands could enable magical attacks. Someone could use pharaonic hair in a curse spell, or mix royal urine with hostile incantations to cause divine indigestion. By carefully collecting and securing all bodily outputs, the palace prevents the pharaoh's essence from being weaponized against him. Second, and this is where it gets medically interesting, the stored urine serves as a health archive. Temple physicians periodically examine it, color, clarity, smell, using it to diagnose problems before they become symptomatic. You're watching ancient preventive medicine disguised as religious ritual, and it's actually not terrible medicine for its time. Changes in urine can indicate diabetes, kidney problems, infections, all things that Egyptian physicians had some capacity to treat, or at least manage. By maintaining a urine archive, they're creating a biological baseline they can compare against, tracking the pharaoh's health through his waste products. The chief keeper now processes toward the temple, accompanied by 2 guards and a priest who chants protective spells to ward off any malevolent forces that might want to intercept divine urine for nefarious purposes. This isn't paranoia, or at least it's culturally sanctioned paranoia. Several papyri document magical attacks that supposedly used royal bodily substances, and whether these attacks actually worked is less relevant than the fact that people believed they could work, which meant the security protocols were necessary regardless of magical efficacy. Historians still argue about how early these urine protocols developed, and whether they applied to all pharaohs or just particularly security-conscious ones. Some evidence suggests that Old Kingdom rulers had simpler arrangements, maybe just dedicated disposal locations rather than full storage and archiving systems. By the New Kingdom, when the protocols you're witnessing were codified, Egyptian royal security had become sophisticated enough to treat the pharaoh's biology as a potential vulnerability, requiring constant vigilance. Its bodyguard work extended to the molecular level. You follow the procession at respectful distance and notice something interesting. Common Egyptians are pulling their children aside, pointing at the chief keeper and his golden vessel, explaining something in hushed tones. You edge closer to eavesdrop and catch fragments. Blessed by the gods' waters, if it touch the ground where we walk, fertility for the fields. There's a folk belief, apparently, that any location where pharaonic urine makes contact with earth becomes blessed, fertility enhanced, capable of producing exceptional crops. It's probably not official theology, but it's the kind of grassroots religious elaboration that grows around royal mystique, turning every aspect of pharaonic existence into potential miracle. The procession reaches the temple and disappears inside. You can't follow into the sacred chambers where the urine will be catalogued, sealed, and stored, but you can imagine the procedure based on similar protocols you've witnessed. The vessel will be labelled with the date, time, and Pharaoh's current age. It will be opened briefly for medical inspection, with a physician noting observations on papyrus using a standardized descriptive vocabulary. Then it will be resealed and placed in a specific location within a chamber that holds hundreds of similar vessels, creating a liquid biography of royal health stretching back decades. Here's a detail that's both practical and weird. The storage chambers kept cool through an ancient climate control system, involving ventilation shafts and periodic flooding with Nile water that evaporates and lowers the temperature. They're essentially running a refrigerated warehouse for royal urine, which suggests that despite all the theological justification, someone involved in designing this system understood that biological samples degrade in heat and that preservation requires specific environmental conditions. Egyptian religion and Egyptian science weren't separate domains. They were the same thing approached from different angles, both trying to maintain Ma'at by different but compatible methods. The protocols extend beyond urine. You learn from casual conversation with a junior priest that there are similar procedures for royal feces, collected in different vessels, stored in different chambers, subjected to different medical analysis. Royal vomit gets special handling because it might contain traces of poisoning attempts, making it evidence in potential security investigations. Even the Pharaoh's bathwater is carefully disposed of rather than simply poured out, because water that's touched divine flesh retains traces of divinity and shouldn't be casually discarded where anyone might use it for unauthorized purposes. The obsessive management of royal bodily outputs creates an interesting paradox. By treating the Pharaoh's urine as sacred and medically significant, the protocols simultaneously elevate and reduce him. He's divine enough that his waste products require gold vessels and temple storage, but he's biological enough that he produces waste products requiring management. He's beyond normal human limitations but subject to bladder capacity. He's a god who pees, and that tension between transcendence and biology runs through all Egyptian royal ritual. The constant negotiation between maintaining divine mystique and acknowledging physical reality. You're back outside the temple now, watching as another attendant approaches the chief keeper with what appears to be a cleaning kit, specialized tools for washing the golden vessel before its next use. The cleaning is itself ritualized, involving specific herbs and purification formulas, because a vessel that's held divine urine can't be cleaned the way you'd scrub a normal pot. Everything acquires sacredness through contact with pharaonic biology, which means everything requires increasingly elaborate maintenance protocols, which means the bureaucracy of managing a living god's bodily functions becomes a full-time job for dozens of specialists. As the day continues, you notice the chief keeper making several more trips between palace and temple. Rameses apparently maintains good hydration, which is medically advisable but logistically demanding for everyone involved in urine management. Each trip follows identical protocol: the golden vessel, the protective chanting, the guards, the careful transportation, the storage and cataloguing. It's Groundhog Day for bladder management, the daily repetition that maintains cosmic order through meticulous attention to biological necessity. Later, you overhear two junior attendants complaining about their career trajectory. One aspires to become chief keeper someday, seeing it as a position of trust and proximity to divine power. The other wants to transfer to a different department, maybe something involving temple finances or diplomatic correspondence, anything that doesn't require him to spend his professional life in intimate relationship with royal urine. Both perspectives are valid within the framework of Egyptian palace culture, where some people find meaning in any service to Pharaoh, no matter how biological, while others seek meaning in services that involve less direct contact with divine waste products. As sunset approaches and you prepare to leave the palace grounds, you see one final urine protocol procession. The golden vessel catches the fading light, transforming it into something that, from a distance, looks genuinely sacred. Not because of what it contains, but because of the collective investment of ritual, attention, and meaning that surrounds it. That's the genius of Egyptian ceremonial culture. It can take the most mundane biological necessity and, through elaborate protocol, transform it into an act that reinforces divine kingship, provides medical data, prevents magical attack, and employs an entire bureaucratic subdepartment. The pharaoh's urine becomes simultaneously waste product, medical sample, sacred substance, and security concern, all held in suspension in a golden lotus vessel that somebody has to carry very carefully, while pretending that what they're carrying is too holy to acknowledge as pee. You're in the palace theatre, though calling it a theatre feels inadequate when you realise it's also a temple, a courtroom, and potentially an execution chamber depending on how the night's performance concludes. The stage is set for a mystery play, one of ancient Egypt's most disturbing ritual innovations, where the line between theatrical performance and actual violence becomes so blurred that even the participants might not be entirely sure which side of the boundary they're on. Tonight's production is a coronation drama, ostensibly celebrating the new pharaoh Amenemhet's ascension, but buried in the script are roles for enemies of the state who will be ritually defeated, and the casting for those roles involves actual prisoners whose survival is, at best, ambiguous. The audience is already assembled, nobles, priests, foreign ambassadors, all dressed in their ceremonial finest and trying to maintain diplomatic composure despite whispers about what might unfold. You're seated in the middle section, close enough to see facial expressions but far enough back that if things get messy, you're not in the splash zone. The stage is elaborate, painted backdrops depicting the cosmic geography of Egypt, props including thrones, weapons, ceremonial vessels, and unsettlingly realistic execution implements that might be props or might be the genuine articles. Egyptian theatre doesn't believe in fourth walls or in clear distinctions between representation and reality. The play begins conventionally enough. Actors portraying gods process onto stage: Horus, Set, Isis, Nephthys, the full divine ensemble, and begin narrating the mythological justification for pharaonic succession. The dialogue is formal, ritualized, drawn from sacred texts that audiences know by heart. Horus reclaims his father's throne from Set, order triumphs over chaos, kingship is established as eternal principle. So far it's standard religious theatre, the kind of performance you might see at any major temple festival. But you notice that the actors playing the gods keep glancing off stage nervously, and several guards have positioned themselves at the theatre's exits. Now the play transitions to its contemporary political content. An actor portraying Amenemhet enters, and it's not an actor. It's Amenemhet himself, because in Egyptian mystery plays, the pharaoh often portrays himself, blurring the boundary between ruler and character. He's wearing simplified regalia, a theatrical version of divine kingship that's recognizable but not as elaborate as his actual ceremonial dress. He speaks his lines, claims of legitimate succession, declarations of divine favor, and his delivery is surprisingly competent. Apparently, part of pharaonic education includes acting training, which makes sense when so much of your job involves ritual performance. The plot thickens. Characters representing Egypt's enemies appear on stage: Asiatic invaders, Nubian rebels, internal conspirators who challenged Amenemhet's succession. These roles are played by actual prisoners, captured during recent military campaigns or arrested during the succession crisis. They're not wearing obvious restraints, but you notice guards positioned near each one, ready to intervene if anyone breaks character or attempts escape. The prisoners deliver their lines, threats against Egypt, boasts about their power, declarations that they'll destroy Ma'at, and you can't tell if they're reading from a script or speaking their actual beliefs. Maybe both. Maybe the script was written to capture their genuine positions, turning reality into theatre and then back into reality again. Historians still argue about how often mystery plays transitioned from symbolic to actual violence. Some scholars insist these were purely theatrical performances where prisoners played roles and then returned to custody afterward. Their participation a form of ritual humiliation but not execution. Others point to textual and archaeological evidence suggesting that some mystery plays concluded with real executions disguised as dramatic climax. The prisoners killed on stage as the ultimate demonstration of pharaonic power and cosmic order's triumph over chaos. The truth probably varied. Some performances remained theatrical, others crossed into lethal territory depending on political circumstances and the pharaoh's disposition. The play's tension escalates. Amenemhat, portraying himself, confronts the enemy characters one by one. The dialogue becomes a litany of accusations and defences, a ritualized trial where the verdict is predetermined but the performance matters. "You who disturbed the peace of the two lands," Amenemhat intones. "You who raised weapons against Ma'at. You who sought to overthrow the divine order. What defense do you offer?" The prisoners respond according to script, their lines written to be indefensible, to ensure that dramatic logic aligns with political necessity. "I sought only chaos," one prisoner declares, reading from a papyrus scroll held by a prompt who stands just off stage. "I delighted in the suffering of Egypt. I deserve whatever punishment the gods decree." Whether the prisoners genuinely believe these lines or are simply reading to survive the performance is impossible to determine. Some might be true believers in their cause, reciting scripted confessions while internally maintaining their opposition. Others might be broken people who've accepted their fate and are cooperating with the theatre of their own condemnation. A few might actually believe they deserve punishment, having internalized the religious framework that positions Pharaoh as cosmic necessity and opposition as spiritual corruption. Human psychology under duress is complex enough that all three responses probably coexist among tonight's prisoner actors. Now comes the moment everyone's been dreading and anticipating, the ritual defeat of enemies. In the play's climax, Horus, portrayed by the high priest of the temple, raises a ceremonial mace above the first prisoner. The audience leans forward. Will the blow land? Is this theatre or execution? The mace descends and stops inches from the prisoner's head. The prisoner collapses on cue, feigning death, and guards rush forward to carry him off stage. Real death or theatrical restraint? You can't tell, and that ambiguity is precisely the point. Egyptian mystery plays thrive on the uncertainty, the possibility that at any moment performance might transform into genuine violence. The pattern repeats with each prisoner. Some blows land with thuds that sound authentic. You hear impact, see bodies jerk, but whether bones are breaking or padding is absorbing force remains unclear. Other blows obviously miss, stopping dramatically just before contact, theatre that everyone can recognize as theatre. The variation itself is unsettling because it prevents the audience from settling into confident interpretation. Are we watching executions or performances? Are the prisoners who exit the stage being taken to cells or to burial grounds? Egyptian religious theatre refuses to resolve this ambiguity because the ambiguity serves political purposes. It makes the pharaoh's power feel arbitrary, unpredictable, absolute. Between the ritual defeats, the play includes lighter moments that feel jarringly out of place. Comic relief characters, gods portrayed as bumbling or confused, deliver jokes that get genuine laughs from the audience. Music plays, dancers perform, the mood momentarily lifts before plunging back into violent political theatre. It's tonal whiplash that would confuse modern audiences but apparently satisfies Egyptian aesthetic sensibilities. Maybe the humour serves to release tension, making the violence more palatable. Maybe it reinforces that this is performance, distancing viewers from complicity. Or maybe Egyptians simply enjoy variety shows where comedy and potential execution share the same stage. The play approaches its conclusion. Amenemhat delivers a final monologue, part self-justification, part divine mandate, part warning to anyone considering opposition. Let all who see this know, Mart is eternal, Pharaoh is eternal, Egypt is eternal. Those who align with order prosper, those who embrace chaos perish. The choice is always available, but the consequences are certain. It's propaganda delivered as religious truth, political message wrapped in cosmic inevitability. The audience applauds, enthusiastically, because not applauding might suggest sympathy with the defeated enemies, which would be unwise. The prisoners who played enemy roles are now gathered at the front of the stage. Are they bowing for applause or awaiting final judgment? Amenemhat approaches each one, placing his hand on their heads in a gesture that could be benediction or condemnation. He speaks words you can't hear from your seat. The prisoners are led off stage by guards, and you realize you'll probably never know definitively what happened to them. Maybe they're returned to cells to await formal trial and conventional execution. Maybe they were executed during the performance, and what exited the stage were corpses carried by guards maintaining theatrical protocol. Maybe, and this is the most unsettling possibility, they're being released, having served their purpose as ritual scapegoats, their participation in their own dramatic condemnation, somehow satisfying the cosmic debt their rebellion incurred. As the audience files out of the theatre, the conversations are subdued. People are processing what they witnessed, trying to categorize it, struggling with the same questions you are. The foreign ambassadors look particularly unsettled. One Hittite diplomat is pale, clearly shaken by a form of political theatre his culture doesn't practice, and his ethics can't easily accommodate. An Egyptian noble notices his discomfort and offers reassurance. "It's only theatre, honoured guest. Surely you have similar traditions." The Hittite responds, "We have theatre, and we have executions, but we keep them separate." The Egyptian looks genuinely confused by this distinction. Later, you attempt to investigate what actually happened to the prisoner actors, but the palace bureaucracy is deliberately opaque on this point. Records show they were transferred from military custody to temple custody for the performance then. The trail ends. No execution orders, no release papers, no further documentation. They've disappeared into the gap between theatre and reality, and that gap is apparently where Egyptian political power prefers certain inconvenient people to remain. Neither definitively dead nor definitively alive, existing in liminal space where their fates serve as warnings without requiring explicit violence that might trouble diplomatic relations or theological purity. The mystery play system reveals something profound about how Egyptian power operated, through deliberate ambiguity, through refusal to distinguish between symbol and reality, through performances that might be either or both simultaneously. By making political violence theatrical and theatre potentially lethal, the Pharaoh creates an atmosphere where opposition becomes not just dangerous but conceptually unstable. If you can't tell whether rebels are being executed or just playing roles in dramas of their own defeat, resistance itself becomes harder to conceptualize. Egyptian mystery plays weren't just entertainment or ritual. They were sophisticated psychological operations disguised as religious ceremony, and whether anyone actually died tonight matters less than the fact that everyone believes someone might have, which is sufficient to maintain the system that keeps pharaohs ruling, and rebels either cooperative or very, very quiet. You're standing on a palace balcony at Thebes, but calling it a balcony understates its ceremonial significance. This is the window of appearances, the Kekeret Netta, literally divine window, and it's one of ancient Egypt's most calculated pieces of architectural theatre, a stage designed specifically for the pharaoh to perform spontaneity, to shower favours on loyal subjects in displays that are meticulously scripted to feel improvised, generous, and divinely inspired. Amenhotep III is about to appear, and below in the courtyard, hundreds of officials, soldiers, and artisans wait with the anxious energy of contestants on a game show, hoping their names are called, hoping they'll be among the chosen few who receive the pharaoh's golden attention. The window itself is the architectural marvel, a broad opening in the palace wall framed with electrum that catches sunlight and makes the entire structure gleam like a portal to the divine realm. The frame is carved with protective symbols, uraei serpents, winged sun discs, cartouches proclaiming the pharaoh's names and titles. Below the window, the courtyard has been carefully arranged so that everyone has a view, but also so that proximity to the window correlates with social rank. Viziers and high priests stand closest, common soldiers and craftsmen furthest back, the architecture literally encoding hierarchy into spatial relationships. You're positioned off to the side, close enough to observe, but not so close that you're part of the ceremony's focal point. Attendants are preparing the pharaoh for his appearance, and you can see them through a gap in the curtains, adjusting his collar, positioning his crown, arranging the contents of several large baskets that will serve as props in today's performance of royal generosity. The baskets overflow with gold, collars, bracelets, rings, and most importantly the Shebu collar, a massive necklace of golden beads that's the highest honour the pharaoh can bestow, instantly elevating its recipient to the upper echelons of Egyptian society. The ceremony begins with a trumpet fanfare, 3 long notes that echo across the courtyard and silence all conversation. The curtains part. Amenhotep appears at the window, and even though everyone knew he'd appear, even though this happens multiple times per week during festival periods, the crowd reacts with genuine awe. He's positioned so sunlight strikes his golden crown and reflects into the crowd, momentarily blinding observers and creating the optical effect of the pharaoh emerging from light itself. It's stagecraft worthy of any modern production, and it's been refined over centuries of window of appearances performances. Amenhotep raises his hand in the standard gesture of greeting and blessing, and the crowd responds with a ritualized cheer, not spontaneous, you notice, but coordinated, probably rehearsed by group leaders positioned throughout the courtyard who cue their sections. The pharaoh begins speaking, his voice amplified by the window's acoustic design, which functions as a natural megaphone projecting his words across the assembled masses. "My beloved people," he begins, using the formula that's been standard since the Old Kingdom. "Those who maintain Mayat through loyalty and service. Today, I reward your devotion with gifts from the divine treasury." Here's where the ceremony's scripted spontaneity comes into play. Amenhotep spontaneously notices a particular official in the crowd, Nebamun, a military commander who recently returned from a successful campaign in Nubia. "Nebamun!" the pharaoh calls out, his voice filled with apparently improvised delight. "Approach the divine window." Nebamun processes forward with a combination of pride and performative humility, his face arranged into an expression that suggests he's shocked, honoured, and overwhelmed, despite the fact that he definitely knew this was coming. Because window of appearances honours are scheduled weeks in advance, and recipients are informed privately beforehand so they can prepare appropriate responses. Historians still argue about how much of the window ceremony was genuinely spontaneous versus completely choreographed. Some peppery suggest that lower-level recipients might genuinely be surprised, their names selected by advisors and announced by the pharaoh without his detailed foreknowledge. But high-profile honours like the Shebu collar were clearly planned. Too politically significant, too expensive, too important to social hierarchy to be left to actual spontaneous generosity. The performance of spontaneity was the point, the theatrical illusion that the pharaoh's favour flows naturally, guided by divine wisdom rather than bureaucratic calculation. Nebamun reaches the base of the window, kneels in the prescribed posture, and raises his hands to receive. Amenhotep lifts a Shebu collar from one of the baskets. This one is magnificent. Gold beads interspersed with a lapis lazuli, the kind of necklace that weighs several pounds and announces its wearer's status from across a crowded room. But before bestowing it, the pharaoh delivers a speech praising Nebamun's service. The battles won, the tribute collected, the loyalty demonstrated. The speech goes on for several minutes, and you realise this is partially theatre, entertaining the crowd with tales of military valour, and partially propaganda, emphasising that rewards flow to those who serve pharaonic interests effectively. Finally, Amenhotep lowers the collar, but he doesn't simply hand it to Nebamun. That would be too mundane. Instead, he drops it, and the collar falls through the air in a glittering arc, landing on Nebamun's outstretched hands with a weight that nearly knocks him over. The dropping is intentional, part of the ceremony's symbolism. Gifts from the divine realm descend from above, falling like rain or manna, and the recipient's job is to catch them, to be ready and worthy to receive what the gods provide. Nebamun secures the collar around his neck, and even from your distance you can see tears on his face, either genuine emotion or excellent acting, possibly both, since the line between authentic response and performed gratitude probably dissolves in moments of actual social elevation. But Nebamun isn't the only recipient. The pharaoh works through his prepared list with the efficiency of someone who's done this hundreds of times. Lesser officials receive gold bracelets. Skilled artisans get rings. Even common soldiers receive small gold tokens, not enough to make them wealthy, but enough to demonstrate that pharaonic attention extends to all levels of society, that even the lowest soldier potentially has access to divine favour. Each bestowal follows the same pattern. Name called, recipient approaches, brief speech, gift dropped from the window, recipient expresses gratitude and withdraws. The ceremony's genius lies in how it reinforces social hierarchy while creating the illusion of potential mobility. Yes, the viziers and generals receive the massive gold collars, but that common soldier also got something, also had his moment in pharaonic attention, also receives a gift he can show his family and neighbours. The system keeps everyone invested in pharaonic power because everyone has experienced, however minimally, its benefits. It's sophisticated political management disguised as religious ceremony, disguised as spontaneous generosity. You notice something else. The courtyard is filling with gold. By the time Amenhotep has worked through his list, dozens of people are wearing new jewellery, holding new tokens, their social status visibly elevated through pharaonic favour. But here's the economic cleverness. All that gold comes from temple treasuries and military tribute, meaning it's not actually costing the pharaoh anything personal. He's redistributing wealth extracted from conquered territories and religious taxation, cycling it through a ceremonial display that reinforces his power before it settles into the hands of loyal supporters who will now have material interest in maintaining the system that rewarded them. The ceremony approaches its conclusion, but there's one final element that makes the window of appearances truly distinctive: the rejection. Amenhotep spontaneously notices someone in the crowd, You can't see who from your angle, but you hear the name called Camerset approach the window. The man approaches, clearly expecting honour, his face arranged in anticipatory gratitude. But when he reaches the prescribed position, the Pharaoh speaks differently. Camerset, your service has been noted but found insufficient. No gift descends today. Return to your duties and strive for better. The man's face collapses. He withdraws without gold, marked now not just by absence of reward but by public rejection, and the crowd's silence is absolute because everyone understands they've witnessed a demonstration of pharaonic displeasure as powerful as any execution. The public rejection transforms the window ceremony from pure gift-giving into something more psychologically complex, a system where favour and disfavour are both performed, where social elevation and humiliation occur on the same stage, where the Pharaoh's power is demonstrated equally through what he gives and what he withholds. Camerset will now return to work under a cloud of perceived failure, and everyone who witnessed his rejection will be reminded that pharaonic favour isn't automatic, isn't guaranteed, must be continually earned through service that meets divine standards. Amenhotep makes his final pronouncements, blessings on the assembled crowd, exhortations to maintain ma'at, reminders that loyalty brings reward while treachery brings destruction. Then he withdraws from the window, the curtains close, and the ceremony concludes. The crowd begins to disperse, but slowly, because people want to examine each other's new jewellery, to congratulate the honoured recipients, to offer performative sympathy to Camerset while secretly feeling relief that they weren't the ones publicly rejected. You linger in the courtyard as it empties, watching the social dynamics reshape in real time. Nebamun, wearing his new Shebu collar, is immediately surrounded by people seeking his attention, some offering genuine congratulations, others clearly angling for advantage now that his status is elevated. Lesser recipients cluster together, comparing their gold bracelets and rings, their conversations mixing pride with subtle competition about whose gift was larger, whose speech of praise lasted longer. And Camerset stands alone near the courtyard's edge, his isolation a visible marker of disfavour that nobody wants to risk association with. The window of appearances ceremony will repeat tomorrow, and the day after that throughout the festival season. Each performance will follow the same pattern: the fanfare, the appearance, the speeches, the descending gold, the occasional rejection, and each performance will reinforce the system that keeps pharaohs powerful and subjects eager for the attention that transforms ordinary lives into divinely favoured ones. It's brilliant political theatre that costs the pharaoh nothing personally while buying loyalty, encouraging competition for royal favour, and demonstrating that in Egypt, your status isn't fixed by birth alone but can be elevated or destroyed by pharaonic attention, which makes everyone constantly attentive to pharaonic preferences, which maintains the system indefinitely through the simple mechanism of regulated hope and calculated fear. As you finally leave the courtyard, you notice that workers are already preparing for tomorrow's ceremony, sweeping the ground, adjusting the window's curtains, arranging new baskets of gold. The theatre of pharaonic generosity requires constant maintenance, daily performance, repetition that transforms calculated political management into what feels like natural cosmic order. And somewhere in the palace, scribes are preparing tomorrow's list of recipients, balancing political necessity with the appearance of spontaneous divine favour, ensuring that the window of appearances continues to appear as a portal where gods reward mortals rather than what it actually is, a stage where power performs itself into legitimacy, one golden gift at a time. The night settles over Thebes now, and the palace grows quiet. The rituals you've witnessed, from cobra venom coronations to royal urine protocols, from false door feedings to mystery play executions, fade into the soft darkness of memory and stone. These bizarre ceremonies, these elaborate power games, they seem strange to your modern mind, perhaps even troubling. But they were the threads that wove Egyptian civilization together, the performances that transformed mortal rulers into living gods, the daily renewals that kept Maat balanced and the Nile flooding on schedule. Do you remember the pharaoh lying in his sarcophagus during the dummy burial, breathing in darkness, rehearsing death? Do you remember Hatshepsut adjusting her false beard before audiences, claiming authority through symbols that transcended gender? Each ritual, no matter how odd, how elaborate, how uncomfortable, served purposes that made sense within a worldview where symbols and reality merged, where performance and truth were indistinguishable, where maintaining cosmic order required constant theatrical vigilance. The Egypt of the pharaohs is distant now, separated by millennia and worldviews, but its rituals speak to something timeless. Humanity's endless creativity in constructing meaning, in building systems that transform ordinary lives into cosmic significance, in finding ways to make power feel inevitable, natural, divinely ordained. The Egyptians did this through gold and beards and stored urine and cattle worship and executions that might be theatre and theatre that might be executions, and it worked for 3,000 years, which is longer than most empires manage with considerably less bizarre infrastructure. So rest now, letting these strange stories settle like silt after flood season, nourishing rather than disturbing, transforming into dreams of limestone corridors and golden windows, and the peculiar majesty of a civilization that worshipped cats and crocodiles and calves with 29 specific markings. The pharaohs sleep in their pyramids, their bizarre rituals preserved in stone and papyrus, and the collective memory of a species that never stops inventing elaborate ways to make power feel sacred. Sleep well, and may your dreams be strange and ancient and full of ritual significance that makes perfect sense until you wake.